Thank you for joining us this evening. Regular scheduled council meeting of the Park City City Council on November 10th, 2020 at 7 p.m. Marlo, would you call the roll?
John Lanier.
Here.
George Glover.
Here.
Ben Saucetta.
Here.
Melvin Kerr.
Here.
Tom Jones.
Here.
George Capps.
Here.
Brandy Bailey.
Here.
Jim Schrader.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Tonight, Pastor Whitmore is going to lead in the invocation, and Councilman Glover is going to lead in the pledge. If everybody please stand.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Will you guys please pray with me? Gracious Heavenly Father, I do thank you for your blessings and your grace that you show us every day. Lord, I just pray for this country, and Lord, I just pray for Park City. I pray for all these council members here. Lord, I just pray you help them to make good decisions and just have good wisdom. And Lord, we'll just give you the honor and praise, and I thank you for that. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You may be seated. The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. George?
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Alvin? I'll second that. Motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. We don't have anything for awards or presentations this evening, and we have 3 people signed up for public forum. So, Sharon? And Kaylee?
Hello. Do I need to remove my mask? Nope, okay. My name's Sharon Wyatt, and I have requested that the speed limit on Grove be decreased or at least enforced because of the amount of traffic it has increased. Multiple cars go by all day faster than the speed limit. And I know that in the spring, I think it was, there was a speed monitor, and you could see the cars slam on their brakes when they approached the speed monitor. And it's just imperative that people, like, they accelerate, they slow down when they get to the stop sign. Sometimes they stop, sometimes they don't. And there's a lot of children on our block and in the area, especially with that beautiful park there, and it's just not safe. So that's my request.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kaylee?
Good evening. My name is Kaylee Jones. I am originally from Kansas City, but we purchased a home on North Grove 4 years ago. We have 2 small children, and so we thought the home was ideal because there's 3 parks right across the street from us. We envisioned our kids playing at the park and just being kids. In the 4 years that we've been here, we have seen a large number of drivers speed down North Grove. As you know, the speed limit is 30. However, they go way faster. I reached out to the mayor in May, and the speed trailer was put up for a couple of months. Mayor, you did share those the data with me, which thank you for sharing that. But as Sharon just mentioned, those that live on Grove noticed that the drivers were still going very fast and hitting their brakes when they would see the speed trailer. So long-term, it was ineffective. So like Sharon and many others on our block, we would like to request a more permanent solution, either reducing the speed limit drastically or creating speed bumps. Some research that I found that if a pedestrian is hit when a vehicle is traveling 30 miles an hour, there's a 1 in 3 chance that that pedestrian that is hit will die. If it's at 35, that chance jumps up to 1 in 5. And I and several others on North Grove feel that our children and the pedestrians that use those parks and those beautiful walkways that we have, it's just not safe. So again, just echoing, we just request that drastically decrease the speed limit or create speed bumps. So I thank you all for your time and serving our beautiful city and for your consideration.
Thank you.
Right. Their speed monitor, was that the trailer or did they use the hoses?
No, we have that new trailer that collects data.
Okay,
Yeah. It was the new one that we purchased earlier this year.
okay, thank you.
Linda?
This is a bit overwhelming. I've lived in Park City 39 years. There was no development on the other side of Grove. I used to have a really good time in that hedgerow. It was just one lane, people parked, and you had to dodge in and out, and I loved it. But with the progress of our city, we now have a huge street called Grove Raceway, so to speak. And I am guilty of getting a ticket on that street, and I'm on my last stretch, going home in the evening. I want to be there already. I know that it's hazardous. The traffic is terrible. I've had a young man pass me on Grove, because I was going the speed limit. One evening, I walked my dog from one end of the park to the other, and I counted 48 cars in a 25-minute time. There's an issue there. If for any reason, it's because of the amount of traffic that has developed over in that way. It's the best way to come into the neighborhood, because I live on Wendell, and I don't take the winding way around anymore. I go down Grove because I'm in a hurry to go to work or wherever I'm going. And I mean, truthfully, I'm not trying to be funny about it. It gives you an illusion of a big road. Why do you have to be driving low driving speeds through there unless you see somebody? If they're walking their dog, I change lanes, and go around them. But I really think it's time some serious consideration be given to changing that in there. I enjoyed the thing that told us how fast we were going, because I really felt guilty if I drove past it faster. No different than going into a school, the school zones. But I think that I can't speak for everyone else, what they think when they see that sign, that reading. I'd also think that it might even be wise that the people that are living on the east side of Grove don't have to cross Grove. They're driving up and down Grove to get to their neighborhoods. But when I come down the street with my dog, I have to cross Grove. And it would be great if there was a crosswalk. Not have to be a light, but a crosswalk. Maybe a speed bump before you get there so that people have to slow down. Have some courtesy to stop long enough on a speed bump to see, oh, there's someone passing here. Cars park along Grove, and you can't always see cars coming from either way. I think it's an issue, and I saw that some of my neighbors were talking about it on the neighbor website and felt that I wanted to voice my opinion tonight. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
That was it for public forum this evening. We'll move on to staff reports, and we'll hear from our city administrator, Sean Fox. Sean?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just 2 items to update you on tonight. As of just this afternoon, Sedgwick County issued a new, more restrictive local health ordinance to reduce the spread of COVID within the community. The order goes into effect at 12:01 a.m. tonight, Wednesday the 3rd, and it'll be in effect until December 31st at midnight. Highlights of the order include capping mass gatherings to 100 people or 50% of the fire code capacity, whichever is less. But individuals also must be able to maintain 6-foot social distancing. Mass gatherings apply to both restaurants, bars, nightclubs, fitness, and health centers due to not wearing masks during those activities. Other highlights include bars, nightclubs, restaurants selling alcohol can stay open till 11 o'clock, and then after that, the doors must close, and curbside or carry-out services can continue past midnight. Retail stores are not considered mass gathering. However, they are limited to 50% of their fire code capacity. For Hartman Arena and other large venues of 2,000 or more, where 50% of the fire code capacity is still a rather large number, they must garner approval from Dr. Menz in order to hold any events. Religious institution, childcare facilities, schools, and the courts are exempt from this order. And the second item is about 3-4 weeks ago, council's well aware that somebody damaged our median gateway sign at 61st right in front of Quick Trip. Nobody claimed responsibility. No police report was filed. Our public works staff did a great job working on the stonework itself. They were able to remove the black scuff marks off of that, but the actual metal portion of the sign was damaged pretty good. It impacts the way that it's mounted to it there as well. So our staff is currently working with the original manufacturers of the sign to see if we can get that rectified and fixed. So it looks a little bit better now, but still there's some damage to it. So we're working it. That's it, Mayor.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Sean? Not seeing any. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion? Brandy?
Make a motion to approve consent agenda as presented.
Jim?
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. That brings us to new business, item 5, which is discuss and consider an ordinance authorizing the taxable industrial revenue bonds to sleep-in suits. Sean?
Yes, sir. Normally Dominic Eck would be here from Gilmore and Bell to present, but he is feeling well, and so he'd asked me to present on his behalf. Before you is an ordinance authorizing issuance of a taxable IRBs for the sleep-in and suites for up to $6 million. As a brief history for the council, the original resolution of intent was approved by this council back in August of 2018. It was based on a cost-benefit analysis and our own internal guidelines that it was approved for 60% abatement. Then the resolution was amended in October of 2019, where they wanted 60% abatement. Rather than doing that over 10 years, they requested 100% for 6 years. Still equates to the same. So this is now an ordinance authorizing the city to go ahead and issue those taxable IRBs for the sleep-in. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Sean on this? Randy?
I don't have any questions, but I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 1111-2020, an ordinance authorizing the city of Park City, Kansas to issue its taxable industrial revenue bond series 2020 sleep-in and suites project for the purpose of paying the cost of the acquisition, construction, and equipping of commercial facility and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewithin.
Tom?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Are there any questions? Not seeing any. Marlo, would you call the roll?
John Linear.
Aye.
George Glover.
Aye.
Ben Salcetta.
Aye.
Melvin Kerr.
Aye.
Tom Jones.
Aye.
George Capps.
Aye.
Brandy Bailey.
Aye.
Jim Schrader.
Aye. And that ordinance passes 8-0. Thank you, Marlo. That brings us to item 6, which is discuss and consider the purchase of agenda software. Marlo?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I come to you this evening to propose the purchase of some agenda software. Granicus is an intuitive and flexible cloud-based agenda software, management software for small to medium governments. Granicus will simplify the agenda creation process, optimize accessibility and transparency, and streamline the meeting process. Granicus will also assist in finalizing meeting minutes in a timely manner. It will also provide the technology that will empower the city's organizations to create better agendas and minutes for the people we serve. Staff received 2 quotes and virtual demonstrations from Granicus and iCompass. Staff talked to city clerks who use both Granicus and iCompass to get their feedback. And staff conferred with the IT department, and we feel that Granicus fits the best needs for the city.
Could you elaborate on any of the differences between the software packages, on what would sway us one way?
Actually, I would say that Granicus, their software was a little easier to navigate than iCompass. Also, iCompass, whenever you go to our website and you want to click on to see our agendas and meeting minutes, they actually take you to a whole different website. So that was something else that we weren't really fond of.
Okay, thank you. Brandy?
With Granicus, can we go back and put in history? And is that part of the package?
Yes.
And how far can we go back?
I'm sorry, I didn't ask them. I'll have to ask them.
And then another question is, it talks about on the billing, the cost, the billing is upfront. So are we paying for this before we actually get the product and get it up and going?
You'll pay for the first year, not the whole.
But we're gonna pay for that upfront before it's actually
Yes.
in, okay. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Is there a recommendation from the council? Jim?
I really don't have any questions on this, so I would move to approve the quote from Granicus and authorize the mayor to finalize and execute a contract not to exceed $10,609.17 for the agenda management software.
And John?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. I now call agenda item number 7, which is case number Z 2020-03. This is a request to rezone property at the northwest corner of I-135 and the Highway and 85th Street North from the C2 Service Business District and the I-1 Light Industrial in conjunction with a protective overlay for a truck stop travel center. Before we proceed, I will ask any of the council members if any of them intend to disqualify themselves from discussing or voting on this case because they have conflicts of interest and a particular bias in this matter. Okay. I now ask the council members if they have received copies of the unapproved minutes from the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting on October 19th and 26th, which summarizes the hearing on this case.
Yes. Yes.
Having determined that all the members have received the required information, after the zoning administrator's report, I will ask the applicant and the public which has been identified that will be speaking this night if there's any new information in this case otherwise not presented at the hearing that should be brought to the attention of the council. The council may also want to direct questions to the applicant, staff, or other persons present. I now call on our zoning administrator, Russ, to provide us with a brief background and report on the case and recommendations of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Russ Avey, interim zoning administrator for the city. This is a zoning request from the C2 Service Business District to the I1 Light Industrial District, requested on a portion of lots 4 and 5, Saddlebrook Second Edition. This particular request, due to the nature of area opposition, spanned the course of 2 meetings. The original publicized public hearing was held on October 19th, 2020. The majority of that meeting dealt with public input as well as presentations and questions and answers of the applicant. At the close of that public comment section, the Planning Commission chose to adjourn and hold a special meeting to conclude their discussion and consideration of the matter the following Monday, October 26th, after which several hours of discussion and some additional questions and answers. The Planning Commission ultimately recommended 6-1 to approve the request, subject to the staff recommended protective overlay, with several modifications and clarifications. Specifically among them, staff's recommended original protective overlay called for staff review of several items, the landscape screening plan, as well as an overall site plan and architectural plan for the development. After discussion with the Planning Commission and, of course, having understood a lot of the neighborhood concerns, it was modified to require Planning Commission review and approval of those 3 items. There was an additional protective overlay element added that would also provide a secondary screen around the proposed overnight tractor-trailer truck parking area to further limit noise, as well as, I assume, corral some of the idling truck exhaust, environmental concerns, things of that nature, but primarily to provide just a secondary form of separation for the truck parking itself. As you will have seen in your agenda packets, over the course of the last few months, the city has received a considerable amount of public input, written objection, as well as their testimony during the October 19th hearing. Those materials, specifically several memos from leadership within the HOA and their legal counsel, is in your packet as well. As the applicant's presentation to the Planning Commission outlining kind of what their vision is for the site. After, like I mentioned, quite a bit of discussion on the second hearing as well with staff. Again, the record shows that the Planning Commission utilized the findings that staff had prepared in support of their recommendation of approval. It was a little bit of a short turnaround with the 14-day protest period from the 26th, which ended today at 5 o'clock. But the opposition did submit 42 protest petitions, and there is a memo by separate attachment that you have received outlining the protest petitions that were filed, the number, which was 1 that specifically counted against or counted towards this 20% statutory threshold for additional voting requirements for the governing body to approve a request like this. The memo outlines in fairly sufficient detail, I believe, the methodology used in creating, in reviewing and calculating a protest petition. And there, the memo also on the final page has Exhibit A, which shows those who filed protest petitions against the request. The one, again, property owner in Saddlebrook that affected the vote, or had an opportunity to affect the voting requirements, as well as the notification boundary and how we kind of got that all processed. With that, I will stand or sit for any questions that you may have. I know this is a fairly complicated matter for the neighborhood, and a lot of questions were asked, and we have not heard any questions from the governing body, so staff as well as several members of the public are probably here to answer any questions that you may have.
Russ, I'm going to ask you a few questions
Okay.
before we kind of drive on a little bit further. One of the questions was, that I had specifically to you, was if we were to add something to the protective overlay that would not allow an occupancy permit to be issued until after verifying that the protective overlay elements have all been put in place. In that discussion, really, the permit itself cannot be pulled until those protective overlay elements have been put in place. Would that be correct?
In general terms, yes. And I know that the protective overlay, we haven't had many of them as far as my tenure here with the city. So this is a 17-point protective overlay, and it's fairly well confusing if you're not accustomed to them. But item number 14 on page 6 of the staff report gives an example. I touched on it earlier, but an overall site plan shall be required for review and approval by the Planning Commission prior to the issuance of any building permits. So they can't even get to the step of requesting an occupancy permit until they have built the facility and are looking to occupy that facility and operate that facility. So in at least my estimation or my opinion would be that item 14 ensures that the fine details of this protective overlay are incorporated in their development plan that they will bring to the Planning Commission, which would be a public forum to discuss the finer details and the final details of the proposed project prior to them being able to even start construction on the project itself. If we were to modify these conditions, it is quite possible. It does require a 2/3 supermajority of the council to override that recommendation. And we would be more than happy to sit here and work with the governing body on modifying any or some of these, any of these conditions that any of the council members may have issue with. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have any questions for us? Russ, I'm going to drive on with a couple more. There was a Longhofer study that came out talking about property values. Can you address that?
I don't have anything in front of me to speak off of, but I am someone who's very familiar with Dr. Longhofer at Wichita State. He runs their real estate and development program there, a tremendous young man. My initial reading of that, and I will preface my opinion by saying that when we get into one of the hallmark issues with opposition to a development plan such as a zone change, we always hear, I mean almost invariably hear, that it is going to negatively impact area property values. And as a practitioner for 25 years and doing zoning cases on not only as a city staff member, but also as a developer's agent, we simply do not hang hats on the notion, I would argue the unverifiable notion, that a particular land development project negatively influences property value. In looking, in past zoning cases and in reviewing this, since it does come up time and time again, we as practitioners search for a study, any type of anecdotal evidence that would help support that notion. And if that was to be shown as a valid objection to a zoning case, we would certainly incorporate that and account for that in our processing of all these development applications. Mr. Longhofer, I think, stresses that point a little bit more in general terms, in that there is no conclusive evidence that a commercial or industrial or a non-residential development such as this project would has any verified evidence that there would be a negative impact on area property values. I think he goes on in his discussion that there are other mitigating factors, and I think those mitigating factors is central to staff's position in the staff report on this particular application, and that is the introduction of development restrictions that would help mitigate any potential impacts. So we heard from noise, we heard about lighting concerns, we've heard about separation, the buffering, you stay over here, you stay over there. And we felt like in our staff comments that we had a protective overlay that accounted for those items that we can account for. The public had issues with public safety and things that fall outside of the purview of zoning. And so I think I would completely agree with what I read from Dr. Longhofer as far as it is something that is often discussed but hardly ever shown to be the case as far as the negative property value impact.
All right. The other thing that I had heard multiple times is that there are no other truck stops that back up to residential areas. But I know just 30 minutes up the road in Heston, you do see a truck stop that's backed right up to residential area and a golf course across the street. Have we looked into how many other truck stops exist that are around residential areas?
That's interesting that you brought up Heston, because I'm from Hardy County myself, and I'm very familiar with that particular project there on the east side of town at their interchange with Lincoln Boulevard or Lincoln Street. I will preface my comments by saying I, as staff, do not hold that fact. That fact may or may not be true. I personally and professionally do not think that it is relevant to the discussion here. It could be the first one of its kind. It could be the 1,000th one of its kind. I don't think in my responsibility in reviewing these applications to look at broader markets, to look at other cities' land use patterns, my job is to look at this, each individual development application on its merits as it relates to Park City and Park City's plans and policies and regulations. So I know that it was brought up. Perhaps I should have done some research around the state. I did not feel or do not feel that that's necessarily germane to this particular development application, but I am familiar with Heston's, and certainly we have the Heston Municipal Golf Course, which holds some of its nicer residential development around it, is to the east, across the street to the east, and their newest, or at least one of their newest residential developments is literally just to the north. Just to the north,
I think the only
all
thing,
along the interstate.
The only thing that I see that separates that is a drainage area, and there's some evergreens that I think are planted, and that's about the scope of that, where those trucks back up to.
Certainly, yeah, that, and, you know, that area of Heston, and Heston's a small town, but that area of Heston is probably their most intensive commercial area. So I think there's I know that there's a hotel and a Pizza Hut there that's been there forever. And I think there had probably been a Casey's convenience store there, but the 80 or so semi-truck trailer parking area is fairly new relative to the residential development to the north.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. Ben?
I have two things, but one I want to reiterate there. I had a good conversation today up in Heston for that very instance, there for that very reason concerning the truck stop, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about that. I made sure I watched all 4 hours of the public comment portion of the meeting on October 19th, and I watched the following Monday to hear those. And one of the comments that was brought out consistently was that there is nothing like this. It is just about 30 miles up. It's a 75 truck station that is about, at its closest point, about 25 to 50 feet or so from a whole entire residential area. Casey's petitioned to redo theirs, and that was approved about 3 years ago. After doing my research on this, and with that, the only concerns were from residents at that time was sound and noise, or sound and smell, because they have a lot of cattle feeds. I asked concerning land values, because that was another thing that was brought up. And from the city side there, they have not seen anything impactful one way or another concerning land values. Now, they don't have a good study necessarily on that. But from what they have seen in the 3 years that this truck stop has been there, they have not had an issue that has been brought up by residents concerning land value. The other thing I asked was concerning crime, because that's been another issue that has been brought up. That area sits right off of, again, right off the highway, and then literally right up to the housing developments that have several houses. And the crime rates have not increased there in any way, shape, or form that has been impactful. So I found that very interesting. So I wanted to reiterate that part just in what I was doing as I've been going through this. One concern I do have on here when we go to the findings, and is on on fact number 14, concerning is the request in conformance with the comprehensive plan, and does it further enhance the implementation of the plan? And obviously there's thoughts on both sides of this, and within this there's even, I'm looking both at the law firm, Adam Jones's response to us concerning it and matching it with ours. One of the concerns I do have, though, comes in our planning, where it says, as may be expected, most of these types of industrial businesses can create environmental problems. The physical separation of such an industrial area from the main residential part of the city is of mutual benefit to both types of land. And it continues on there. So obviously we're looking at rezoning from commercial to industrial. And we are doing it within a very small section, or within a very small gap of buffer between a residential and industrial zone. I understand that really the only part to this application that requires the industrial zoning is the overnight trucking. All else could be done tomorrow if they wanted to. I understand that. But my concern is if we make exception in this case to go against at least a portion of what we have listed in our comprehensive plan, do we then open ourselves up further down the road for precedent being set? Yes, sir.
I certainly don't, Russ Avey again for the record, I certainly don't mean to interject myself. I didn't know if that was a question
Yeah,
that you
sorry.
asked.
Yes, sorry. That was my question. Sorry.
Certainly. 14 was in coming out of the 2 planning commission meetings. The 14th factor is obviously always one of those, at least in my experience, one of those that people can use, again, in this circumstance, the comprehensive plan to argue their point, regardless of what their point may be. You will see that I pulled from the planning, or from the comprehensive development plan for the city, a rationale that I used. And several points of these 14 or these 17 factors they're all debatable, or most of them are debatable, certainly. And I think my response during the Planning Commission review of this one, this was an item that was brought up on multiple occasions, is there again. It was at least my initial position on the matter that while we classify this locally as an industrial use, and I'm not, the merits of my arguments are certainly not beyond reproach. But when I was looking at what was actually proposed, I found a difference in that which we regulate locally as an industrial use and that which is classified as an industrial use for such things as taxation purposes. And nothing within the proposed development application, as restricted by the protective overlay, I would argue does not fall into the industrial land use category by several different metrics, with the exception, and I do not mean to undermine this exception, the local relegation of that particular travel center use to the industrial district. Clearly, our planning commission and our city council has determined that that is an industrial use. And so that's how I came to my position in debating those elements. I will say, as far as precedent goes, this was something that was not brought up at any of the two planning commission meetings, but since you had brought up for the first time the idea of precedent, I will just point out for the record that the last zoning case, the two zoning cases that you have approved this year went from a mix of residential uses to industrial to the I-1 zoning district, the second of which is 100 feet away. Well, it actually borders, quite frankly, it borders, I believe it's Prairie Hills subdivision to the south. So I think we've well-established precedent that the city is comfortable with industrial zoning. As a matter of fact, much less restricted industrial zoning district to just as many, if not more, homes from a proximity standpoint. So I think that would be, I'm not an attorney, but I would say that we do have a history of looking at these, and we do have a history, as a matter of fact, an incredibly recent history of approving I-1 light industrial zoning next to R2 and R1 residential subdivisions. Both the industrial zoning or the industrial uses that that zoning is going to permit coming after the establishment of those residential neighborhoods. So,
No, I appreciate that very much.
Mayor and council, from a legal standpoint, the use of the term precedent, these zoning matters that are tract specific are just that. They're very fact specific and unique. And so in the context that many people think of legal precedent, your decision on one of these, even if they're similar, has no bearing whatsoever on one in the future, or nor should you look to the past. These are standalone decisions that are fact specific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Brandy?
I do have a question on item 12. So some of the concerns that were in the emails that we received talked about if we change this to I-1, then it would allow for agricultural feed and grain mixing, asphalt and concrete mixing, frozen food lockers, et cetera. And so that was a concern that was raised. But in item 12 of this finding, we are making this where it's just specifically a truck stop. There's no other option for these other I-1 allowable items under our zoning regulation to go into that area, correct?
that is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was
Certainly,
clear on that.
certainly. And I think we tried to articulate that to some degree during the first, or during the second Planning Commission meeting on the matter. It is a wonderful tool, at least in my opinion, is the Protective Overlay District. It allows, and there again, I think I've said all I wanted to say in item 12, but that's true. Industrial, we are able to take the more impactful or potentially impactful land uses out of it and really create a very tailor-made, again, as Mr. Mosier mentioned, tailored to site-specific requirements. So, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
John?
Yes, so Russ, I went through the comprehensive plan. I just had a few questions about some of the stuff in that, and I may have some follow-ups later. I was looking at the plan there, and and I know you said that this was drawn up by, or approved by the council and the planning commission, but what is it about overnight parking that makes it segregated from being in commercial? What are the factors of it? In a professional opinion, what makes it industrial?
So based on how you phrased that question, I can't get there. I don't understand. I don't question local authority on their ability to create regulations that segregate land uses in the manner that we segregated land uses. I don't understand. I cannot come up with a good basis on why overnight truck parking would be considered an industrial use as opposed to many of the things that we see in C2. But I am not an appointed official for the city of Park City, nor am I an elected official for the Park City, nor had I really had anything to do with Park City when we adopted the zoning regulations that we're encumbered by. So I will say, for example, my experience is primarily within Wichita-Sedgwick County's jurisdiction. I know that Wichita-Sedgwick County would not regulate travel centers in the same manner. As a matter of fact, it would be a C1 permitted use if you're looking at the equivalents. Wichita allows that in the LC zoning district. I know that Goddard does not prohibit travel centers. They allow that in their commercial zoning districts. Having said that, Keachai, a neighbor of ours, they have a kind of a hybrid, kind of a bizarre zoning set of zoning regulations. But since this travel center would be within 1,000 feet of a neighborhood, they would require to go through a separate process of getting what would be in essence like a planned unit development, which would look and function a lot like our protective overlay. So Keachai, for example, wouldn't permit that in their zoning district. They deal with all travel center type of land uses as a special use or a conditional use, very specific. It's not permitted outright in any zoning district.
On the plan that's drawn up, we haven't seen anything on it, but for the overall plat and I guess the project, where does the drainage going towards Broadway? Do we know, have we got that far?
So prior to the conception of this travel center project, at least in my knowledge of the development of this particular piece of land, Mr. Robelli, the applicant, had filed a preliminary plan to revise the existing lots 4 and 5 of Saddlebrook Second Edition. So they had approved through Planning Commission a preliminary plat of what is going to be called Saddlebrook Commercial Park Edition, where they had pretty similar street. They had a different internal street layout. So then a few months pass. Mr. Robelli comes to the city with this travel center idea, and they revised the preliminary plat, not only to extend a road north to the north line of the quarter section, as opposed to an earlier version cul-de-sac, but then they reconfigured the lots to match the application area. So the drainage plan fundamentally stayed the same, with a portion of this particular travel center, a small portion of it draining to the KDOT right-of-way. Some of it is taken to the north, then to the west, to basically the southeast corner of Saddlebrook residential neighborhood. And then they have a 90-foot, an expanded, it started out as 70 feet, now it's a 90-foot reserve that's going to carry utilities, drainage, and provide screening and the berm that we spoke so much about. So some of their drainage will go east, most of it will go to the west to a separate pond. Saddlebrook was always designed with a pond that exists today to take care of everything. With modern regulations, that's probably going to be inadequate, so the developer has proposed a pond further to the west, next to the existing pond in Reserve A, Saddlebrook Second Edition.
Blight. Define blight in terms of the comprehensive plan?
I think as it relates to land use, things that have a blighting effect would be poor property maintenance standards. I think we see some blight. I think we see some blighted properties, along certain portions of, say, Broadway Avenue, where the city had annexed in a bunch of things that were built decades ago in Sedgwick County. The reason that those types of uses were built in Sedgwick County most likely had to do with the lack of regulation. And so when you bring upon a land use that would be gravely incompatible, let's say we did have an asphalt concrete plant that would stand some 80 to 100 feet tall, that would have aggregate stored and milled around, you would have certainly a considerable amount of dust pollution, things of that nature. That could potentially have a blighting effect where somebody no longer wants to invest in the upkeep of their property. Then it kind of grows outward from that. If my neighbor doesn't have to take care of their stuff, then I don't want to have to take care of my stuff. So that would be my general understanding as it relates to a land use question.
Thank you, that's all I have right now.
Okay, Jim?
Just a few general questions here to kind of get started, but, you know, looking at the protest petitions here, I mean, obviously one is the valid protester, but I'm curious if anyone calculated a percentage of Saddlebrook that protested here. It looks from the shading to be 50% roughly.
It's almost exactly a third, 33.7%.
Okay.
And that is excluding out of Saddlebrook the undeveloped lots that are owned by a developer. So of the developed portion of Saddlebrook,
Okay.
roughly 34% of the property owners living there protested.
Okay, I understand. I was curious, let's address traffic around there. I'm thinking of the northbound 135 ramp that's the tight cloverleaf. Obviously, trucks can get through there. Has anyone, I don't know who would be the person to answer this, but has anyone really studied that? Are we going to have to, will this need an upgrade to that ramp? And that would involve the state and would be a little bit physically impossible with the cemetery there. Has that been addressed at all, that on-ramp?
So there had been, for development projects to the south of this property, as a year or several years ago, there had been a traffic study of this general area, primarily for the determination of road configuration as well as signalization at Hartman Drive, knowing that we had this 30 to 40 acres of C2 service business district commercial zoning that was left, that is still undeveloped. But then we saw development coming north on the south side of 85th Street. And so with Hartman Arena, increased development, then the camper land comes online. There comes a tipping point at some, where additional traffic improvements are needed. And so what a traffic study does is it allows local decision makers the ability to determine whether or not there should be financial guarantees from land developers in that area benefiting from those transportation facilities as to whether or not they should share the burden of the cost of such things as signalization, widening of roadways, left turn lanes, XL, decel lanes, and things of that nature. It was a KDOT sponsored, or KDOT was a partner in that traffic study due to the fact that they have rights leading up to Hartman Drive, if not actually at Hartman Drive. And I will apologize, I've only been here just over a year, and I know that Mr. Fox has probably a little bit better intimate knowledge of the details of that traffic study. But nothing's going to happen to that cloverleaf unless KDOT decides that it's going to happen. And I'm a little bit curious as to what power that cemetery, those two cemetery tracts have over the state and what can be condemned and what can't, because it's curious that they would have made that investment without perhaps the relocation of that cemetery. But that was well before my time, and I can't address that. But
Okay.
I know that there has been a traffic study. Whether it pertains to that northbound on-ramp, I can't say for certain. It does account for improvements to 85th Street as well as signalization requirements once traffic gets to a certain point to warrant those improvements.
Okay. And the last part of this, that addressed part of what I was going to ask too, was the traffic lights, but, and what would be involved in adding or changing, adding them in this case. And I just have no concept for this, so I got to ask a question here. You know, obviously semis are going to be decelerating to come up to this, and you go through a lot of communities that say no Jake brakes. And I'm grew up on a farm. I've driven trucks with Jake brakes. I mean, they're loud. They really serve a good purpose, but they're loud. What's the process? I mean, that's another state question, I think. I mean, does anybody know the process to get, I mean, I think you want an area with no Jake brakes coming up here. You got too many houses around here.
So there again, that meets that boundary between zoning issues and things that belong outside of zoning. So that is a traffic enforcement, a transportation public works issue. There are certain roadway signs that I believe it's the MUTCD, the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, that dictates where a stop sign can be, how high that stop sign has to be, how many feet away from an intersection. It is an engineering design document that has to be followed. So we can't prescribe a signal, as an example. It has to be warranted. Otherwise, the city has certain liabilities if they install traffic control devices outside of the norm of the appropriate engineering standards. So it's something like no parking signs, something I would imagine about no Jake brake signs. Those probably may have a little bit more local discretion. It may simply be something that the Public Works Department, upon request, can install at various locations. I feel it more the latter. I don't think those types of signs are heavily regulated. I think that would be something that could be imposed as needed. Let's say this request would be approved, then that would be something that we could either add to the protective overlay. I just got done saying that a lot of these things can't be included within the zoning spectrum, but I think that would be one that could be certainly looked at.
Okay, that's all I have for the moment.
Jim, just to add to that, if you look at Heston along 135, KDOT does have those signs up that says no Jake brake.
They do, okay.
I don't know the process of that, but they do have those installed.
Okay.
Okay, Tom?
I'm good.
You're good? George?
Yeah, I have a question. On the trucks, they're going to be separate from the residential area. Are they going to be approximately 500 feet from the residential area? And is anyone going to be monitoring those trucks to make sure they stay within that?
I'll separate that out. So according to the protective overlay that was developed and approved, or at least recommended for approval, that separation is 500 feet. And that is something that they will have to account for in their site plan review that's also built into the protective overlay. So we will be able to enforce that on paper at the time that that site plan is submitted for review. The second part of that question is a code enforcement issue. And there again, with the approved site plan, it does give us the ability to clearly indicate, because if you recall, the Planning Commission recommended an additional requirement that this overnight truck parking area would be screened off. So I think that will help code enforcement readily identify any overnight truck parking outside of that, that little cordoned off area. Other than that, general truck parking, I don't believe in my fairly quick review of the city's municipal code that there are any prohibitions over overnight truck parking. You know, if I had a grocery store, I think I used the example of a Dillon's grocery store where a delivery truck or trucks would come in the middle of the night, sit there and idle until they open up for removing the food items, the groceries from the distribution trucks. That has caused a lot of problems in general, and so there are times that we'll do a protective overlay or some sort of limitation on a zoning case where we have the prohibition of any type of overnight truck idling near the environs of a residential development. So that, there again, that's a typical case-by-case thing. But there would be nothing really other than that if there were any other type of retail business that were to develop to the west on the balance of this Saddlebrook commercial area. I do not see where the city would have any additional ability to govern those types of truck parking.
Going back to your factors, number 12, and the direct effects on the citizens there in Saddlebrook, has there been any studies that you have any understanding of how maybe, like, I'm getting a lot of concerns about drugs being introduced, also sex trafficking in those truck stop areas? I guess what my concerns are, have you seen any studies, have you heard anything whether or not that would be influential in those surrounding communities as far as spreading out?
I will answer that, like I've answered several other questions, that falls outside of my purview with this, for this particular case. I certainly have, as we all do, personal opinions on the matter, but of course you hear, similar to the loss of property value, you hear about crime and safety. Trying to squeeze in a nightclub, tavern, or bar in a residential area obviously creates certain issues from the public, hours of operation notwithstanding, but crime, people intoxicated, trespassing, property damage, things of that nature. But those typically really deal with a physical separation. And in this particular situation, we do have berms. There's a series of things that a person would have to go to get into that neighborhood. So from that standpoint, no, that doesn't factor heavily into this because it's a crime thing. I'll try to be brief here. It is to sell drugs, to prostitute, to human traffic is illegal, whether it's at Saddlebrook Commercial Park Edition, lots 1 and 2, whether it's in lot 57, block D, Saddlebrook 2nd Edition neighborhood, whether it's across the street from City Hall here. So those issues are policing issues, as they all are, regardless of zoning. Now, the question is related to a zoning question in that, does Park City have the police resources to mitigate any potential increase in crime? And that's something that, as interim zoning administrator, I'm not going to answer, but the chief may certainly answer that question. Sean may certainly answer that question. Is this going to be such an increase over a typical commercial development that it warrants additional public are we going to have to hire 3 or 4 more officers to deal with this one particular land use? That is a relevant question.
Thank you.
Ben?
I do have a question, kind of going back to the protective overlay portion. We've mentioned the berm a couple times here. An email that's come up a few times. I know that they had to go through a landscape architect when they design the height and what trees and such go in there. My question is we have seen issues with the quality of what's there right now. I understand that's not going to be what's there. So understanding that's not the location or anything like that, if that dirt is used, there's obviously issues of garbage and such already in that. Will the landscape architect portion provide for the quality of the dirt or soil used in the berm?
That's a great, simple, straightforward question that I don't know if I can provide a simple, straightforward answer to. In general terms, yes, if that berm, if that soil contains hazardous materials or any other type of contaminant that is restricted locally or even at the county level, then yes, it would have to be mitigated. It would either have to be removed or capped, similar to like a C&D landfill. I will say this, with my experience on C&D construction and demolition landfills, KDHE has a very permissive list of things that you can bury. And so if it is a 5-gallon paint bucket, if it is some certain types of roofing materials, lumber, rebar, concrete with rebar. Those things are not regulated. So from that standpoint, it would be best practices. I don't think a landscape architect's going to get drawn into the environmental portion of that, but clearly that's something that we're all aware of. That's something that no one wants, obviously. And so I would need to further explore what type of mitigation practices that would be. But we do have regulations on the books if it's material that shouldn't be there.
Thank you.
Russ, just real quick, you touched on C1 just a minute ago. Could you just cover the difference between C1 and C2?
So oftentimes zoning districts are stratified in which the more restrictive, less intensive zoning district, in this case C1, would allow a host of commercial and office type of uses. The C2 district is very standard in most zoning, in many zoning regulations. It basically says all commercial uses is permitted in C1 together with some additional commercial or non-residential type of uses. I think, I just kind of wrote down several examples of some C2 uses that would not otherwise necessarily be permitted outright in the C1 district. And we're looking at things like building and material stores, like a Menards, that has a large presence. It's a large retailer from a footprint standpoint, and generates a lot of traffic to the site, as well as has a lot of heavy truck traffic, not only deliveries and hauling. It's just it's a transportation hub in and of itself, even though it's a retail type use. Likewise, we have like many storage facilities, that's allowed in C2 and not in C1 without special approvals. There again, that's the type of use that serves local residential development, but it's also a 24/7, 365 days a year type of use. It never stops. And so I think that my opinion of the differences here locally between C1 and C2 is it allows some larger, more intensive, from a traffic standpoint, land uses, and also some that don't have the kind of the standard operating hours of 8 to 5, like many businesses do, or even from 8 to 10 o'clock where your retail shuts down. So it allows some uses that would typically or traditionally have longer hours of operation.
And so some of those that I have written down, taverns, clubs, pawn shops, obviously the service station that we've already addressed, that could be put in there. It just doesn't allow the overnight parking.
That's true. I'm sorry, I must have misunderstood the question. If the question is, and this is something that I've stated on several occasions as well, if this is something that we're looking to differentiate between what is permitted today and how it's permitted, more importantly, versus what is being proposed under this application, I don't see a great bit of difference, quite frankly. As a matter of fact, one can argue a lot of the things that are added to soften the impact between the existing residential and the existing commercial zoning completely comes from this application. Today, there are the limitations on all of these development standards are reduced down to just those basic ones that are permitted or required by our zoning regulations, which, if you look at the screening and landscaping requirements of our zoning code, I feel like it is lacking, to be perfectly honest, and something that we will be talking with the Planning Commission about upgrading. What is permitted today, at least in my opinion, is impactful to that residential development in the area as this with the protective overlay is.
Okay.
So we have those that look at it from a commercial to industrial all or nothing idea, whereas I am looking at it as we're adding one use out of I-1 and building this protective overlay to try to mitigate any potential impacts.
Okay, thank you, Russ.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Not seeing any, we covered the petition, but having determined that a valid petition has been submitted to the clerk but does not meet the supermajority voting requirement threshold, I would remind the council that a simple majority of 5 favorable votes are necessary to approve the case as recommended. Further, there are 6 votes necessary to overturn the Planning Commission's recommendation and deny the request or to modify the recommendations of the conditions of approval. Does the applicant wish to present any new information? Lou, I notice you're here this evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. At this time, I believe that with the protective overlay and everything we've put in place through the Planning Commission to protect the integrity of the neighborhood, I'm trying to make this as a first-class truck stop. You know, a lot of people, and a lot of the complaints was fumes and, you know, all that stuff. Well, in the new trucking world, with the DEF in the filtration system, the exhaust coming out of that truck is cleaner than the air going in it. So I don't really believe that's an issue. What we're trying to do here is make a development for the truck stop, and then whatever proceeds around this to commercialize this area as a whole. And I feel that there is no truck stop in Wichita, Kansas worth parking at this moment, and not saying nothing about the windows in our neighborhood. I have 100 drivers out there, and I ask questions about what the concerns are on the road about truck stops or travel centers, they're called now. And it's always about cleanliness, being protected, clean showers, a place for them to relax instead of sitting in a truck. You know, the regulations of trucks is that you have to sit for 10 hours a day. So if you're sitting in a semi, you drive that thing all day long, and then you get done at the end of the day, then you go out maybe and get yourself a bite in the travel center, take a shower, and then you go back into this truck and go to sleep and stay there. So you're never out of your truck. It's like you're in a cocoon. So what we're trying to have as a concept is a big lounge area for these drivers, a chapel. They want to go to church on Sunday morning. It'll be not a preacher, but it'll have a, telecast from like a local church here in town. We're trying to make it where it's more comfortable. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Are there any questions to the applicant from the council? George?
George brought up the subject of sex trafficking and drug trafficking. Are you planning on having any physical security there? I don't mean cameras, I mean people. Do you plan on having security to patrol your lot?
Well, we weren't, no. We were gonna have cameras on all the lights, a really sophisticated camera system that you could really see what's going on. And we'd have one person in the travel center that his job would be to monitor that. So if, not a police officer, it'd be one of our own employees that would be looking at these cameras for any,
Well, that was my point. He was talking about having to have more police officers. I really don't think it's Park City's place to provide security for
not on a private property.
No, not on private property. That's your responsibility.
Yeah, we're gonna have cameras on all the lights, and then, we'll have someone looking at that.
Well, I know I've seen some places like Walmart where they have security patrols that drive through there. Mm-hmm. And, personally, I think that's a good deterrent.
And another thing back on the fumes and all that, we're going to a green truck stop, okay? We're gonna have electric hookups for the truck drivers for heat and cool, so they don't have to idle. Now, we're designed to park 80 trucks. We can't afford 80 of these right now, but the EPA gives you a discount back for trying to go green on this truck center. We're looking into solar for help. But But yeah, we're gonna have cameras that will be monitored by employee.
Well, I know some of the letters I read, which I forwarded to planning and zoning, I noticed there was a lot of concern about prostitution and stuff like that, and I don't know if cameras deter or not.
I would think the cameras would help on that, obviously, because if you got someone watching it, the prostitutes are gonna go in there, they're gonna be walking the parking lot, they're gonna be in a car, they're gonna be knocking on the door if that's the case. You know, there's truck stops that are really bad about that, but they're not in a Park City, Kansas. You're talking like Ontario, California, or East St. Louis, where there's a lot more population. There is issues with that, but there is truckers against that. There's a program out there to be trained to what to look for, you know, and all that.
Are you good, George? Okay. Anybody else have any questions for Lou? John?
How far are you on the planning of the project? Is there drawings or renderings or anything?
We're sketching drawings right now, John. We're looking at probably a 20 to 25,000 square foot building. We'll have a sit-down restaurant in there. You'll have other small, you know, like carry-out restaurants. Like I said, there's going to be adequate showers for the drivers, female and male, lounge area, everything. There'll be like similar to what Camperland has around the outside of it, like a facade. It'll be out of not mostly metal, and then the front will be stucco and maybe some bricks on the corners. We went to a truck stop in Oklahoma 2 weeks ago, Mike? And it was really nice, and we liked the design of it. But right now, we're just sketching. You know, we got a lot of work to do here. I mean, we have to put all the roads in, we got to put all the storm sewers in, all the water, all that prior to even building this. So we're talking, if everything is good, we're probably talking the end of next year, this time next year. We should have a truck stop, hopefully.
What's the overall estimated cost of the entire project?
Between 10 and 13 million. The whole parking lot's gonna be paved with concrete. There won't be no gravel, no asphalt. It'll be concrete. And the reason why, because the concrete will stay there a lot longer. People that know trucks, if you got 80,000 pounds in the truck and it's asphalt and it's 95 degrees outside and you're turning like this to back your truck in there, it just eats it up. So that's why the cost is so expensive to do this. Like I say, we want to do this right the first time so we don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel.
So speaking of the cost, I'm just curious, like the restrictive overlays that you've seen here, which one of them I wanted to ask you about? It wasn't in the restrictive overlay, but I noticed in the public hearing they had for the planning commission, they mentioned, Mr. Richardson mentioned that it'll be fenced all the way around the parking area, but it's not in the restrictive overlay. So I'm curious what, with the addition of all the restrictive overlays in it, including the fence, what's the projected cost of that overlay? How much is that adding to your project?
Oh, I would think probably $1 million to build the berm and plant all the trees on it, and then build the fence around the truck stop.
Okay.
Another issue about the fuel as far as spillage and all that, we've done a lot of research. We've had Phillips in there. We've had, who's the other one, Mike? Cenex. Those tanks, double check, the tanks that go in those grounds, they're all based on pressure switches. So if the pressure goes down, it shuts off. The ability to have a leak in the new version of tanks is probably less than 2%.
Okay. And I know you've probably watched the hearing from the last time too, but, and we talked about it a little earlier, but do you know of an example of a truck stop that was built adjacent to an existing neighborhood?
One in Heston's right next to the neighborhood.
Like an existing neighborhood that then the truck stop went in after the neighborhood?
No, Flying Eagle.
Where's that?
Within 100 foot of a very large neighborhood.
That's over on
I'm not sure
235.
when either were established, but the neighborhood.
This size,
Been there a long time.
100 trucks parking overnight,
Yeah, trucks parked overnight.
100 trucks?
I don't think there's space for that. But the distances from fuel pumps, property line, and overnight parking. Sorry, the distance from the key things like the pumps, the overnight parking, and then just the property to property of the nearest home are about half the distance we've committed to in aggregate. All are closer than what we're planning.
Okay.
There's also a few other examples in Kansas that I'm aware of. I visited all the nearby places, and I'm confident in the distances there.
Okay, while you're up there, in the prior hearing too, there's been a lot of talking, and I'm sure you've heard some of it, but you had made a comment that if this business was similar to what other people thought it was, that you would be there with them. And I just want to give you a chance to explain to me what you meant by that, because it didn't sound very good.
I agree. My intention was the local nearby examples of truck stops are in very poor condition, next to zero lighting, virtually zero lighting in the parking lot. I visited them at night. Multiple access points to the parking area. And the parking lot itself is just in a very poor condition. What I was trying to say is, if that was my only perspective of what the truck stop would look like, and not knowing what the plan was for the business we're planning to open, I would be opposed to it as well. I would not want the nearby truck stop near my neighborhood. And I'm not surprised that there's been criminal reports as well there.
There's what?
There's been, I think some of the opposition brought up that there's been reports filed for potential crime.
Criminal activity,
Yeah,
prostitution, theft.
I'm not sure if it's just, confirmed, but certainly complaints called in. Our business will not invite that. Cars will not be allowed near the trucks or in the truck parking area. There's a fence all along 135 and around the truck stop where the parking is, so people walking in would have a very difficult time. We will have, in addition to the videos, which are the cameras, will be the videos similar to Quick Trip, will be very prominently displayed to all the drivers.
So you recognize that, there's criminal element that comes with the overnight parking, or as such, theft, prostitution, these sort of things. I don't know if that's mine or yours, I'm sorry.
Generally, my research says that we're trying to protect the drivers more than anyone, because there's crime committed on them. The business we visited 2 weeks ago that Lou mentioned has been open 5 years. Is one of the type of businesses we're modeling ours after, and they've had zero crime. We met with the owner.
What'd you say?
They were kind enough to invite us. The owner of the business has not had any crime in 5 years. Again, it's not similar at all to what someone who lives nearby or in Park City has experienced in this area.
So I guess, we know Lou, he's done projects in town, done a great job on them. I guess the reason I'm asking these questions is because obviously, as they mentioned in the prior meeting, we don't really know who's gonna have this truck stop in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it may be. But my question, I guess, I just wonder what do you see inside of in the restrictive overlay that also prevents the behavior that you're talking, that you say you would want to live by if it was one of the bad ones? What in that protective overlay prevents or eliminates that behavior.
Or another business, or however many years down the road you're saying?
For your business.
For our,
because
for our
as-
business, the fencing is certainly something that's spelled out. The location of the parking, I don't know if the protective overlay specifically says that it's along 135 area, that it's fenced in. But in the protective overlay, I'm not sure there's specific items beyond that that are there for the primary reason of criminal activity.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yep.
Is the restricted parking for regular passenger vehicles, is that in the overlay? I'm assuming it's probably
I'm
not.
not sure if it is. It probably
That's just a
is
company
not.
policy that's, if someone else takes the business, they could not. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be, obviously it's our policy and we'll enforce it, and there'll be signage
Same with the
depicting that,
cameras.
so if someone doesn't accidentally just drive into that area.
Okay, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Lou, I got a couple of questions for you, and then Jim. We talked a lot about trucks. I'm curious on your vision, are you including regular gasoline fuel pumps up front, similar to something that Casey's has that services the rest of the public as well?
Yes. The fuel island for the trucks will be behind, closer to 135. And the fuel island for the public will be closer to the Hartman Drive.
One of the things I think of, we got Harper Camperland just across the street. And if you notice Quick Trip, you're pulling a big fifth wheel, that parking lot's pretty much very difficult, especially in a high traffic area.
Right.
To be able to maneuver and get in there, or if you pull a big utility trailer or anything like that. Are you looking for something that's gonna actually capture those folks as well?
Yes. And our approaches are going to be probably 100 to 120 feet wide off the street, so you don't have an issue with a truck driver coming in and the radiuses they have to turn versus a regular guy with a camper or what have you. So yeah, we're looking into all that. There'll be two entrances. The way we have it designed now, there'll be two entrances into it. And going back on the traffic study that I did, they have designed turning lane off of 135, right off of 135. There'll be a turning lane into Hartman with a light once the traffic gets to that point, which we feel it's going to be instant. And then they designed another road off of Broadway that was part of the study, and that goes straight to Hartman, okay? When you guys get the plot, you'll see what, plot of the whole development that shows that. So our first entrance will be ample for if they missed the turn and they went to Broadway and then turned in the street, the street coming in parallel to the south of the pond that's there now, there'll be a road. It'll go directly into the truck stop. We're trying to mitigate that there's going to be issues with them getting in and out, because truck drivers they like to be where they can get in and out, and they don't want to be in a city. They want to kind of be kind of out of the city. So that's the reason we feel this is a good location. It is in the city, but it's still, the development is going to the north eventually. Park City is going north, correct? So it's just a matter of time before all that area gets developed.
Okay. Jim?
You touched on a couple of things here, but I wanted to let you expand upon the underground storage tanks for all this fuel. I mean, I know that you talked about the pressure switches, but there's more safety.
Yeah, there's more safety.
They're double lined. If one container leaks, it leaks into another container. Am I right?
They have like a, what do you want to call it, like a sump underneath them. It's all gravelled, small gravelled.
And
There'll be 4 tanks. There'll be a diesel, be unleaded, several different, you got the 4 different versions of gas.
Yeah.
Then you'll have a DEF tank for the truck drivers. But, yeah.
And doesn't KDHE, how often do they monitor these? Is it monthly?
I don't know that for sure, Jim.
I'm
I know when I got a fuel island at my warehouse, and I have to get renewal permit annually.
Annually, okay. I do know, I remember enough to know they monitor them, but I just can't remember how often.
That would all be installed by the company that does that, that's in that world. It's double check who we're looking at to do that. They just did all the tanks at Meridian and 53rd when they redid that shortstop.
Okay.
That's what we're looking at.
Is there any protection against, I don't know, surface spills, tanker spills, truck spills? And I mean, I'm thinking of, kind of picking up off what John said about the pond and, you know, that's going to capture the runoff from the parking lot or the parking area. And this is just a question because I don't know the answer to that.
I think there was a spill when I'm not for sure, but what I'm saying is when the fuel company brings us the fuel and they pump it in the ground into the tanks, if they spilled it on the surface, I think at that time you would be contact like a KDHE and they'd have to clean it up instantly.
Okay.
With a foam or whatever they use. The chances of that fuel from the ground getting to the pond, I think is very rare. You're probably talking over a half a mile or more. I don't think that's an issue.
Okay. And then just because I think this question needs to be asked, but you know, why this location?
Well,
I mean, I don't think I've ever seen this many people in the chamber since I've been up here, and yeah, obviously some people don't like the idea, and I just want to get your thoughts on it.
two things. For about 20 years, I've wanted to do this.
Okay.
And I own the ground on 101st Street, which we annexed into Park City. And forever, I thought that was the spot. Well, there's no water, sewer, nothing up there. So that didn't make sense. This property, where I see the growth, where I see all the trucks coming out of our warehouse at 77th Street. You have the warehouse right across the street, which is Winfield Solutions. Then now you have Amazon on Broadway. So you're gonna have a lot of trucks. And that location's 2 miles from there, and it makes sense to be right there. It's right on the highway. We have 76 acres there. We're only using 18 acres of the property. I mean, we're not overwhelming the whole property with the truck stop. And it just makes sense to be there, in my opinion.
Okay. I don't have anything else.
Okay, Ben?
I have a question back. I know we can't, in a lot of sense, tell a private business how to do a lot of their business choices. I want to go back to the protection part that George hit on. You talked about cameras and someone watching them or having someone hired. Are you looking at having someone that has some sort of qualifications there, or something that, I mean, you know, an 18-year-old kid watching cameras can't really do a whole lot or isn't going to do a lot, and it's still going to be dependent upon reaching the Park City Police Department to get somebody out there. From a protection standpoint, even though cameras obviously help solve or can lead to help solving crimes after they've occurred, I don't know how preventative they always are either, especially if you have someone that's untrained or everything. So that's a concern I would have just based upon the conversation.
Yes, we'd have someone trained to do that. You know, whatever the training is, we'd institute that training prior to hiring just anyone off the street to go look at a camera. So, you know, we're gonna have to research how we get that. Do we hire a security guard to sit in a, you know, like you have in a big store, you know, they're behind there and they're looking at the cameras to make sure there's no thefts? We really haven't researched how we're gonna do it, but we're gonna do it. You know, we're gonna have cameras and we're gonna have someone watching them.
Okay. Randy?
So several of the emails we had talked about the dirt that's there now, the berm that's there now. And I understand that that comes from the Amazon facility and that's just there temporarily. But can you address that in this whole concept is going away, that's not essentially what the berm is gonna be behind the residents' homes right now?
That's just a stockpile for now. The berm will go all the way around their property. It'll be on the south side from the pond all the way to the corner, and then north. It'll be we're protecting their property.
So the complaints that we're seeing about the dirt pile that's there and the trash that's in it, the tires that are in it, that essentially is going away?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, Leo. I'm not seeing any further questions. At this time, we'll move to public comments. I've worked with Charlie Davidson, the HOA president, and we have 6 people signed up, and we're giving them 30 minutes. So, Charlie?
Mayor and council, I appreciate the opportunity. I know we had a public forum, and you guys allowed us to come and give us 30 minutes to speak. I'm going to make my comments brief and allow our legal counsel to, I'll defer the rest of my time to him, but I appreciate you giving us at least an opportunity to continue to share our thoughts and our opinions. I can tell you on behalf of the Homeowners Association at Saddlebrook, 88, do I need to say address 8894 North Saddlebrook? Do I need to do that?
Okay.
Okay. I've said it a couple times before, so. But on behalf of the Homeowners Association, I can say that we adamantly oppose the rezoning of this area from the C2 to a light industrial for the implementation of a truck stop. Jim, you had brought up the protest petition about the percentage. I can tell you statutory requirements require a circulator to have those and then sign those in front of a notary, which makes it a little bit more difficult. I know at the very first meeting we came when we didn't have any information before the council, but we came and we spoke against the truck stop. We presented hundreds and hundreds of signatures. And I was the circulator and a parent of 2 kids and a full-time job. Makes it difficult to follow those statutory requirements. But I guarantee you, Jim, if I took a couple days off and you came with me, I'd have 99% of the homes in Saddlebrook that would be against the rezoning of this. I also just want to encourage you as council. I hope none of you have made a decision until you've heard all the information that we're going to present tonight and read all the information that's been sent to you. I know you've received a lot of information over the last couple of months. Just make sure that you're comparing to apples, especially when you're looking at other truck stops. Was the housing addition there? How many trucks are allowed at those truck stops? And I think that's something that when you're looking at something, you have to compare. I work in information myself, and a lot of times they want to say, well, is this a problem in this area? Is this a problem? Well, you got to compare apples to apples when you're looking at those type of circumstances. So I want to encourage you to do that. I know Mr. Avey talked a little bit about he didn't see much of a big difference from the just the overnight truck parking. If maybe a Dillon's was built in that location and then a truck was able to sit there for a few hours. Well, I mean, I'm here to tell you there's a big difference between 75 to 100 trucks sitting overnight idling and 1 truck that's there to deliver a few items to a Dillon's. And sex trafficking. We talked a little bit about sex trafficking, and Mr. Avey had brought up how it's illegal in neighborhoods as well as truck stops. And what I can tell you is that, again, that's not comparing apples to apples. A truck stop's what's considered a crime generator. You look at car washes. Those can be considered crime generators. What do you see at car washes? Well, you see theft, right? You see theft inside of the cash machines or the coin machines because there's nobody there monitoring them. There may be cameras, but there's nobody there monitoring them. Therefore, you see that crime. We're not saying that truckers are sex traffickers. We're not saying that they're involved. We're saying that truck stops are a place of sex trafficking. They're crime generators. They generate that type of crime. They generate the theft. And the reason they do is because of the overnight truck parking, because of the constant people coming and going through those areas. And those are the things that we need to look at. I can also tell you just from a law enforcement background that cameras are not deterrents, okay? You know what we've investigated that's been on camera? Homicides. Do you know what we investigate at Walmart on camera? Thefts. All the time. Aggravated batteries, aggravated assaults. Because cameras, like Ben said, you were correct earlier, they do help us investigate, they do help us solve those crimes, but they are not a deterrent to those crimes. We also talked a little bit about the berm. Mr. Lobelli said it cost about $1 million, and from my understanding, and he said it here tonight, that 101st was a prime location that he would like to have built, but the infrastructure wasn't there. From my understanding, I think about $3 to $3.5 million from a records request we received, I believe, was the cost of possibly running sewer and water from the Saddlebrook addition to 101st. So the possibility is there, and $1 million would go well towards that. So the possibility to build it at 101st is not out of the question. It's a very good and a very possible location to build this truck stop that's not near to a residential area that still serves this community and still serves Park City. So with that, I just want to keep my comments brief. I'll defer the rest of the time to our legal counsel. I appreciate the time to listen tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Mann and council members. My name is Cody Branham. I'm the attorney for the Saddlebrook Homeowners Association. Like Charlie mentioned, I'm going to try to keep my comments brief and sort of hit on things that either haven't already been stated or I think aren't garnering enough attention in this matter. And forgive me if I check my watch. I'm going to try to keep my time succinct here. And so one of the things that's been hit on tonight is the express language in the Park City zoning code that explicitly identifies truck stops and travel centers under the I-1 light industrial use. In my experience, I think Russ would agree with this, to specifically call those out in an industrial use like that is rather unique. But the issue before you tonight is not, is that the correct thing to do? Should Park City, revise the zoning code? And the issue is, is this particular development, is this proposal appropriate for this particular location? And as already been stated, the comprehensive plan clearly instructs you to separate residential and industrial areas from each other. I have yet to hear any justification to blatantly disregard the comprehensive plan. In a written submission, and as already been mentioned here tonight, the applicant compares this site to the Flying Eagle truck stop that's in Southwest Wichita, just off of I-235 and West Street. And one of the questions that was posed here tonight was, when did that development occur and when did the residential development come? And in fact, I looked at that today. That truck stop development was constructed in 1970. It wasn't until roughly a decade later that the residential development to the east of that truck stop followed. And so when that truck stop, however, it came to be, it was a standalone use. There was not residential areas in the proximity that we find them now. In regards to the protective overlay, of course, many of the objections here tonight that were presented to the Planning Commission that are stated in the various written submissions focus on criminal activity and pollution. Simply put, there's nothing in the protective overlay that's going to prevent those things from occurring. And one question I have is, and I think as was mentioned here tonight, is, I think the applicant has the best of intentions, wants this to be a safe place, wants this to be, a top-notch facility. But what happens if the financial projections don't prove to be true? If they lose money in the first couple of years and they look at selling this to an owner that may not care as much, what is of record, what is legally binding on them to fulfill the promises, all the promises that you're hearing here tonight? There's nothing. There's nothing in place to ensure that this is going to be a safe place, an environmentally friendly place. I think something that hasn't garnered enough attention here yet that the applicant admitted, the staff report admits as well, is that this property does remain viable for commercial development. As has been stated tonight, Park City is developing towards the north. Yes, there may not be commercial development there today, but it is approaching that. The Harper Camperland, just across the street, a fairly recent development, is all the evidence you need to know that this does remain a viable commercial property. And really what we're asking for is to, give this property the opportunity for a commercial development that's intended for it. And a question I strongly urge you to consider is, who is this truck stop designed to serve? It's not Park City residents. Yeah, there's a gas station they can go in, maybe get some stacks, refuel, things like that. This development is primarily designed to serve truck drivers and transients, people coming and going. There's no other reason to go to this truck stop. There's no reason to go to this truck stop, certainly if that person resides in Park City. Likely no reason to go to the truck stop if that person resides in Kansas, in Wichita. And in fact, many of those folks on the road probably don't even reside in the state of Kansas. And though it's not intended, an unintended consequence of this is that it's designed to harbor criminal activity. I don't think that the applicant wants criminal activity to be occurring at their property. That's just a harsh reality of what is going to happen here. just ask law enforcement. Ask, one of the things I mentioned in my written submission was the FBI stating, we target truck stops when we're trying to fight against prostitution and sex trafficking. Why do they go to a truck stop rather than a restaurant or some other place? It's because that is where the criminal activity is occurring. We have no idea. This could be a truck stop that has the lowest crime rate in the nation. It could be a truck stop that has the highest crime rate in the nation. You don't know that today. You're not going to know that tomorrow. It's going to be over the course of time that proves to be true. And the ownership of the truck stop, which there are no restrictions on that, is going to be a major factor in how that plays out. And so, I urge you to, take your time making this decision. Look at it as I trust you will from an objective standpoint, because I know that if this is approved, there is going to be an appeal to the judicial district of this. That's just the reality of it. The court is going to take a look at this situation from an objective point of view, as I trust that you will as well. And it's my opinion that no purely objective analysis of this situation leads to a conclusion that this truck stop makes sense in this particular location. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
We'll move on through the comments.
Sure.
And then if anybody
Thank you
has
for your
questions.
time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Paul, you're next.
Good evening. My name is Paul Reifschneider. I live at 629 East Rolling View Drive. I'm here today as a representative of the Saddlebrook Homeowners Association. Since City Council has given us no quorum or place to have our voices heard, nor have they represented their constituents fairly, we have no choice but to take action. To date, we have obtained emails and other correspondence demonstrating a lack of caring for our rights as homeowners and taxpayers. Additionally, the correspondence demonstrates that this City Council took steps to hide actively related to the construction of this truck stop. This subverts the law and has damaged the value of over 100 homeowners' homes and preventing us from selling our homes at current fair market value. My house is currently one of the 7 homes for sale in our neighborhood. Prior to the announcement of this proposed truck stop, our houses were selling at an all-time high within days of being listed. Since the announcement, my house has been on the market for 34 days, after which we had priced it lower than what others in the surrounding area had sold for. We have not had one single offer and have lowered the sale on our house an additional $10,000. We've had 4 open houses and multiple showings. The feedback that we received always includes some comments on the massive dirt pile behind our house. On October 1st, 2020, Sean Fox emailed Mayor Mann about an email from Steve Streck discussing the housing market in Saddlebrook prior to the announcement of the truck stop. In his email, Sean Fox states, "So assuming either the realtors were honest and informed them about the possibility of a truck stop, or they happened to see a massive pile of dirt on the property and ask about it, it appears that wasn't enough to persuade them from putting offers in on the house." This was all before the dirt pile went in, that all the houses were sold. Since then, none. I know that none of these houses have sold. None of the houses that had sold either had a view of the massive dirt pile on the back either. I currently work in Salina, and I made the choice to commute daily and planned on continuing that because of the wonderful neighborhood we chose to raise our 3 children in. As soon as we caught wind of the proposed changes, we placed our house on the market. We were the second house to do so with a view of the field, and the first house that went up before us also is not sold either. Prior to my job in Salina, I worked as an operations manager for a chemical distribution company. I oversaw route scheduling, truck drivers, and truck maintenance. I'm aware of many different issues that are not disclosed in any EPA or DOT reports, including antifreeze leaks, DEF systems not working properly, causing the trucks to idle at a 45% higher rate. We had 6 trucks that we purchased. 4 of the 6, for the first 2 years of owning them, were constantly in and out of the shop because we could not get them to stop idling all night long. They were constantly at overnight truck stops and being asked to move or to leave because they could not quiet it down enough to where anybody around them could sleep. We also had issues with theft, which included people breaking in, cutting our fence, and cutting into our diesel tanks trying to steal diesel, which caused diesel to spill on the ground. And yes, we had concrete all over as well, no asphalt. But the problem with that is then you have your stormwater drainage, and that's gonna get right into there. I don't care what he says about calling in KDHE or anything like that to clean up. It still takes time, and that will get into the drainage system, especially if you have a bulk tanker with a valve that's leaking on the bottom of it. Truck drivers sleep all night, doesn't know that he's leaking, which could be consistent of multiple different hazardous chemicals such as caustic soda, sulfuric acid, muriatic acid, or other petroleum-based products. Along with those hazardous chemicals, you're going to have more runoff from the trucks if they do decide to put in a truck wash, or even from rainwater. Again, with the hazardous chemicals that are being loaded into bulk trailers, not all of that makes it in the trailer when it's being loaded. There's a lot of sloshing, spilling that gets all over the sides of it, in the wheels and the rims. When they get washed, where does all that go? The next issue that I've seen is the extreme road wear. When you have 80,000-pound trucks that are constantly starting, stopping, and turning on roadways, you will tear up the roads, as was alluded to earlier with the asphalt. What are we going to do with our road systems right out in front? Not talking about the parking lot, but the roads themselves. It's going to tear them up. So as of today, we're asking for City Council to take the following immediate steps, or we will continue to take legal action. Please put a moratorium on construction for a period of 6 months in order to find a more adequate location for this truck stop and travel center. Perform an environmental impact assessment utilizing a third-party consulting firm agreed upon by the city and the HOA. Require that the truck stop owner install any pollution controls that are recommended by the environmental impact assessment. Require the proposed truck stop owner to install better light and noise pollution controls along with all affected properties. And last but not least, identify a method for our HOA to recoup damages. Thank you.
All right, Tyra?
Good evening. My name is Tyra Miles, and I'm a resident of Saddlebrook Addition. I have dedicated the last 13 years of my professional career working not only with survivors of human trafficking, but to put an end to it. I come here today as a concerned resident against a zoning change of the Saddlebrook Addition. I'm extremely disappointed in the zoning committee's decision to rezone the land connected to Saddlebrook residential community. Even in these difficult COVID-19 pandemic times, over 60 Saddlebrook residents in our community and others have come to these meetings. We've come to the city council hearing, we've come to the zoning, and we're here again tonight. We all know the risk, but we don't care because we know the zoning change is even greater. Instead of listening to all of the facts that were stated, we feel that, Instead of listening to all the facts that were stated in the meeting, we were offered a lecture on how to parent our children in order to protect them against stranger danger, and a vote that sided with the one lonely property owner. They say it takes a village to raise a child, and our village, which also includes you, our elected officials, and the zoning council, and you are all our neighbors. We are all here today for our children, and we're asking for this zoning change not to happen and for you to help us. The thing is, you cannot talk about venues for human trafficking and not mention truck stops. We know that the majority of truck stops are located in between cities, making it easier for trafficking and crimes to occur. But if we look at some statistics, I'm sure that you can imagine why the residents of Saddlebrook are fearful. In the United States, over 800,000 children go missing each year. In Kansas alone, over 4,000 on average youth are missing yearly. 70% of missing children will be solicited for sex within 72 hours. Now you can imagine how these statistics might change if having a truck stop connected to a residential community. We have to ask, is this the right location for a truck stop? The owner states that this will be much better because this is a travel center. And if we look at what the Polaris Project, which is the organization that's in charge of the National Human Trafficking Hotline, they have a lot to say about this. While sex trafficking occurs at state-operated rest areas and welcome centers, it is most often prevalent in commercially operated truck stops where truckers are offered more privacy and access to more amenities such as dining, lodging, entertainment. Moreover, law enforcement is not present at these locations unless responding to complaints or incidents. Kansas has been given the title as being an originating state for human trafficking. An originating state for human trafficking, which means because of our highway system and geographical location, many of our youth that are trafficked end up in some of the larger destination states such as New York and California. Essentially, this has been given to Kansas because they're finding our children in these areas after the crimes have happened to them. Unfortunately, many children are not found. I spoke to you at a previous council meeting about a victim that I worked with and her horrific story that brought her to the current Park City truck stop. I can tell you that over the last couple of years, I've had several calls from parents living here in Park City for help as their child was being trafficked. You see, the crimes are already happening here. I've worked with over 50 human trafficking victims here in Kansas in the last couple of years. And what are we going to do to keep this from happening? I also know that trafficking is a major problem locally because Cake News has started the Missing in Kansas segment. The Truckers Against Trafficking, which is also a Midwest-founded organization, was created. And the Kansas Attorney General has made laws requiring human trafficking training for all CDL license holders. But we all know that just because you have the training doesn't mean that you're going to enforce or stop trafficking. And even the government has put aside billions of dollars in resolving human trafficking to assist victims that have been a victim of a crime. Well, while Kansas laws are getting better, and I've personally worked on some of those laws, they still are not strong enough to keep traffickers and Johns accountable for their crimes. And as you may know, police officers often speak about domestic violence calls having the highest level of danger when they respond. This is because of the control and the violent nature of relationships between the couple. But when we look at human trafficking relationships, the control and the coercion given are at an even higher level. I often think human trafficking is domestic violence times 10. If a truck stop is being built in Saddlebrook and a victim sees our neighborhood in the nearby distance, the chances of them running to our backyards will be high. A verm is not going to keep a person from running to our backyards. And the danger would be even higher when that trafficker is following that victim nearby. I've heard this over and over again from my survivors. When asked, "How did you get away?" they often report, "I ran." I ask you to look past the politics, to look past the dollar signs, and try to put yourself in our shoes. Would you want this truck stop? Is this truly the best place for a stop? Are you ready for the community and the cost involved when this crimes start to happen? Thank you.
Jerry?
Hi, my name is Jerry Hawkins. I'm a resident of Valley Center. I go to these meetings, not here, but at Valley Center community meetings all the time on issues that are important to us. I do a lot of volunteering there for the city. I'm also a member of the Fiddler's Creek Homeowners Association, which is about a half a mile west of this neighborhood. If Park City were my neighbor, Park City would be the neighbor that wants to build the annoying thing right at the foot of my driveway. Because that's basically my entrance in and out of my city. We try to get all kinds of projects to try to attract people to come to Valley Center, and we consider Park City our neighbor, our friends. We'd come over and borrow a cup of sugar from you. But this truck stop is pretty controversial in Valley Center. Nobody in my neighborhood wants it there. My wife doesn't want it there. We're concerned that you're putting something in a place that's going to be wildly busy because of all of the Amazon and all of the truck areas and all that kind of things. I would be surprised if you would have spaces for 80 trucks where it wouldn't be filled all the time. It's been suggested, and the reason why I brought the apple up here, it's been suggested that apart from overnight truck parking, all other aspects of this project would be permitted currently, as it's currently zoned. So here's the truck stop, right? And here are all the aspects that would be currently permitted, the gas station, the restaurant, and so forth. And this part is the overnight parking. And so it's been suggested that all we're really talking about is the addition of this hardship because you guys should already have to live with this portion of the apple as it exists, right? Well, if the difference between the current zoning, what's being asked for, is just this little sliver of the apple, the overnight parking, that's the measure of the hardship upon Valley Center and the neighbors and Saddlebrook and everybody else. It's just this sliver of the apple. Then shouldn't that also be the measure of the benefit of the truck stop? Hear me out. The measure of the economic gain to the public shouldn't be the things that are already permitted by existing zoning. It should be the measure of the things that are not permitted that should be permitted if the zoning change is approved. In order to compare apples to apples, or in this case, sliver of an apple to a sliver of an apple, weighing the benefits and the burdens, you should be looking at the same sliver, right? What's the benefit to the overnight trucking? What is the benefit to the overnight parking? The measure of the hardship to the applicant from denying the zone change would likewise only be the hardship for not giving him this sliver. It wouldn't be the hardship from not giving him a restaurant or a regular service station or any of the other things that are currently permitted there. So be fair. Don't talk about all the gains to the community. Don't talk about a $13 million investment in the project and at the same time tell the residents of Saddlebrook and Valley Center that the only thing you ought to be complaining about is the overnight trucking parking. Now you might say, well, there's synergy, Hawkins, because when we put the apple back together, the sum is greater than the individual parts, right? There's synergy. You'll sell more hamburgers if you have overnight parking. Well, if you're going to consider the synergistic effects of putting permitted uses with unpermitted uses together, then you ought to consider the synergistic hardships of putting those things together too. So compare the apples to apples. Are we talking about this side? Or are we going to talk about a seriously, ridiculously, wickedly busy truck stop right in the middle of Amazon world and right at the entrance of your neighbor? So to be consistent, if we're only going to talk about this sliver of the apple, here's some questions that have not been answered on the record, and you might be interested in asking these questions of the applicant. Here's the question. What will you charge per night for overnight parking? That's this sliver. How much are you going to get from that? How many full-time jobs are created just from overnight parking? How much is it going to cost you in your investment to get the overnight parking? Of that $13 million you're going to spend, a lot of it's going to be for the parking lot. What's your investment for that? And then what's your return going to be on that investment? I was doing some reading last night. I think that at one truck stop, they're charging $8 a night for a truck. $8 a night. Is that what we're here for? To make Saddlebrook residents miserable for $8 a night? Some of them don't even charge anything because they think they'll sell more candy bars, more fuel. That's this part of the apple. We're not supposed to be talking about this part of the apple. Just this one. Are they compatible? I go to these meetings in the city of Valley Center, and we're always asking ourselves, well, what are other cities doing? We don't know if we've ever done this before. Let's ask other cities. Do we only need one example of a city that's done this, or should we look for more than just one? And are we comparing apples to apples on the other examples as well? Even if you found some examples, do you want to be in the minority and do something that's rare? Or do you want to do something that's common? Do you want to tell your people of your city and your neighbor, hey, I know that we put something that's really annoying at the entrance of your city, that's causing a lot of traffic back up, and it's got fences around it. We did that to protect you from sex traffickers. We don't want the truck stop there. We're not opposed to this apple. We just don't want the overnight parking there because whether you look at it individually, the benefit and the burden, it's not worth it. Or if you look at it collectively, you're going to put a wild and crazy apple right in a spot where it's going to take off like crazy. And when they come to you and say, well, we only used a certain portion or a certain number of acres, and they ask you for more space to do it, what are you going to tell them after you've already told them yes before? It's better to make, pull the Band-Aid off now, tell them now, no. They'll find another location. They can use the money from all this protective overlay expense and use it better in finding a more suitable location.
All right, Abby.
Okay, I apologize. I have my phone and not a piece of paper, but I can get the printer to work. First of all, if it's okay with you guys, I wanted to introduce myself to Lou. I'm Abby. My husband and I own the lot of land or the property that is within the 200 feet, so it's nice to finally meet you. I did want to ask you, since you know where all of us live, where you live.
Where do I live? I live in Harbor Island.
I'd also like to ask what surrounds your property.
Abby, I think if you want to talk with Lou later, I'm more than happy to let you do that. But right now, it's just, we're already beyond the 30 minutes, and if you want to address the council, please do.
I think, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think she was just going to ask a couple questions as part of her speaking to the council. That was that's what I understood. Sorry to interrupt.
Is it okay if he answers that question for me?
I think it'd be more appropriate if you just address the council with what your concerns were.
That's okay. I actually know the answer to it, so I can answer it myself. He lives in Harbor Isle, which is surrounded by lake, and there is a church, I believe, when I looked at the map. Anyways, thank you so much for letting me speak tonight. Thank you for letting us give some voice to our opposition. I wanted to especially thank those of you that responded to my emails. Mr. Lanier, I believe is how you pronounce your name. And thank you for accepting my invitation and coming and looking at our property personally. 3 years ago, my husband, myself, and our 2-year-old were standing on a small plot of land with our builder looking at spray painted lines on the ground, envisioning what our home would look like once the building process was complete. As young parents, we planned our home according to which room would be the safest for our daughter and how many bedrooms we would need to grow our family. We chose a layout that would put us at the front of our house, put our bedroom at the front of the house, and our children in the back. In my head, I was thinking of the cliche thought that whoever is closest to the front door would be the first one to be affected if a home invasion or any other unwanted commotion occurred. 3 years ago, when staring at blueprints, I never imagined that the biggest threat to my family's security would be not what came through the front door, but rather our back door and our locked fence. When we received the official letter about the zoning change request, we were already well aware of the potential for industrial use of the land, as well as a truck stop, and our HOA board was already in conversations with us about how we as a neighborhood would fight this. A small section of my backyard is within the proposed zoning change buffer space. On the map, it's only a small sliver of the property that my husband and I work hard to own and care for. If you were staring only at the map, it would seem insignificant, but like I stated in my emails, air pollution and light pollution do not stop at a green border on a zoning map or at a small dirt pile with pretty grass on top. The noise from a 24-hour truck stop or travel center, as we were told that it was going to be, does not magically quiet itself once it reaches the top of a berm. And criminals and transients do not look at a zoning map and think, I can't go past this point. A dirt hill is the last thing that they will see as a barrier, and there is a reason that the saying running for the hills exists. An example of how a fix-all berm is completely inadequate source of protection or buffer is that there is currently a 30 to 40 foot pile of trash, basically, in place behind our house. Several evenings this past fall, there have been outdoor concerts at Hartman Arena, which is at least a mile from our front door. Even with the dirt pile that is in place currently, and the buffer that our house provides, we've been able to hear the music from these concerts while sitting on our driveway. This dirt pile is about 3 times as tall as what the minimum requirement for the berm has been stated to be. Currently, within the 30 to 40 Currently, with the 30 to 40-foot trash pile, we can also see the lights from Camperland, which is on the south side of 85th. Lou stated that truckers live in a cocoon when traveling for work. Like many of us, our workspaces are not an ideal place to sleep. I respect that Lou wants to create a space that allows for improved conditions for truckers. I've been to many truck stops, or I think Lou actually wanted us to call them travel centers, but he did refer to them as truck stops tonight. I see the need for a well-run truck stop, and I'm not here to debate that. What I am here to say is that while truckers would have a wonderful place to rest while on the job, they would eventually get to return to their home, shower and eat in peace, and lay their heads down on a, sorry, my voice is shaking, on a comfortable bed in a quiet space. If a truck stop is placed in the backyards of an entire neighborhood, all 112 houses with anywhere from 400 to 500 residents, many of which are children, this same peace and quiet that truckers get to go home to after they clock out of work will no longer be a basic way of life that myself and my neighbors can enjoy. I'm not against the truck stop, but if Lou is willing to spend $1 million on a berm that won't be inadequate in providing safety and a noise buffer, why is he not willing to use that money to run infrastructure to a more suitable location? I am asking you, council members and mayor, to please think of the families you'll be affecting if you choose to vote yes to this zoning change, and to put yourself and your children and grandchildren in our place. How would that affect your vote? A total of over 6% of Park City's population lives in my neighborhood, and this zoning change will affect every single one of that 6%. We all care deeply for our families and our children's safety. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assuming the council has received the information they need on this case, I'm going to outline the choices provided under the state statutes for council action. Number one, by a majority vote, move to adopt the findings and the recommendation of the Planning Commission on case number Z-2020-03 and approve ordinance number 1112-2020. Our second choice is by a 2/3 majority vote, move to override the Planning Commission's recommendation, describe in detail the findings of factors and the supporting motion, attach appropriate conditions, if any, and approve the ordinance 1112-2020. Or our third option is by a majority vote, return the recommendation to the Planning Commission for further consideration at its next regular meeting with a statement specifying the bias for the council's failure to approve or disapprove the recommendation. So I'll just leave it to the council now if you have any more questions or any discussion, or if there is a recommendation. Brandy.
Based on the factors that are the motions that we have to choose from, just because the way the rules and laws are laid out, I would make a motion to approve the change zoning district classification from C2 Service Business District to I-1 Light Industrial District for property located north of 85th Street North and west of I-135 Highway, subject to conditions of protective overlay as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Melvin, second. Is there any further discussion?
I'd like to say something.
Go ahead, George.
I've heard everybody talk. I've heard all the concerns and complaints. For me personally, it's about representing the people of Park City, the people that have elected us into office. And that's real important to me, the people that think that I can do a good job or willing to accept the things on what I say, and it means a lot to me. It also means a lot to me to the citizens of Park City. So when I'm elected to this office, I'm serving the people of Park City, and that's very important to me as well. So I adhere to the people that have concerns, because they are my concerns as well. Those are complaints or concerns of the people of Park City. Now, you may not be in my ward, but you still are residents of Park City. So I would adhere to the council that we represent the voice of Park City. Those people that have come here tonight, those are legitimate concerns. There are legitimate concerns for the future of Park City as well. So in saying that, I will say that the one email that I received is, if I had this truck stop in my backyard, would I be happy with it? And it would be a resounding no. Thank you.
Does this, if this passes, does this also adopt the 17 findings of fact and the restrictive overlay that was attached to it?
Yes.
I have quite a few issues with some of the restrictive overlay that was set out. And one I mentioned earlier was about the fence. It's not even mentioned in the restrictive overlay. So I feel like this needs to be defined in the restrictive overlay. You're shaking your head. Go ahead. Did I miss it? I'm sorry.
It's item F.
Restrictive overlay?
Yeah.
Does it define the type of fence or height of the fence? Sorry about that if I did miss it.
F is a buffer with a combination of landscaping and an 8-foot screening fence shall be provided along the western edge of the overnight truck parking area.
Great.
Said buffer shall be included in the required landscape plan for review by the Planning Commission.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
Normally, I thought our normal procedure, we adopt 17 findings of fact separate with the overlay, and then we do, I'm sorry, it's been a while, but.
Doug, do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, there's no necessity to adopt those separately. They're part of the staff report, and they are the basis on which you can vote this motion.
Okay.
Does that answer your question, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. Brandy?
So I just want to say, I have read every email that has come to me. I've looked at every attachment that's been attached to every email. Y'all have valid concerns, you do. As a mother of 2 daughters, I have taken your concerns, and especially your concerns of human trafficking, into account. I've done my research. I've done a lot of research on this. Yes, trafficking does happen at truck stops, but no one has shown data showing that it's more predominantly happening at a truck stop versus another location. Currently, this land is zoned for C2 business district, which allows for bed and breakfasts, mini storages, feed stores, pawn shops, recycling collection stations, schools. It also includes items that are in your C1 commercial areas, which that includes retail stores, liquor stores, bars, taverns, car washes, hotels, motels. Sex trafficking happens all over. It's not just at a truck stop, is when I'm doing my research. It happens at churches, it happens at nursing homes, it happens in the schools, it happens at our hotels, it's happened at quick shops, quick trips, it's happened at Cracker Barrels across the nation. When we talk about the city doing this for the dollars, I have this based on a $5 million project. I know Louis said it's $13 million, but on a $5 million project, that's only $55,000 to the city of Park City in property tax revenue. That is not a windfall to the city of Park City. When we look at the buffers, no one has shown me what would be an appropriate buffer. It varies. Newark City, a buffer could be 25 feet. Wyoming, Montana, a buffer could be 2 to 3 miles. No one hasn't said what an appropriate buffer should be. When we talk about other locations of a truck stop in the state of Kansas, it's been mentioned a few times, Heston has one 28 miles up the road. This is a travel center with 75 spaces. It is located 75 feet from the residential area. The closest resident, or it's located within 75 feet of the closest resident's property line, and it's 177.86 feet to the home's patio door. I applaud the applicant for staying 500 feet from your residential land. Like I said, currently it's zone C2, where we could have the feed stores, we can have the restaurants, we can have the hotels, we can have a gas station, we can have car sales, we can have busing happen here. It's been mentioned tonight that a car wash is a crime generator, but right now, currently, a car wash is allowed in this location. If we allowed these right now, there would be no zoning, we wouldn't have to go to planning and zoning, so there would be no requirements in place for what would the lighting and the signage laws or requirements be. There would be no requirement for a buffer or a berm there. So with this coming to the planning and zoning, we've now added where those requirements are there. There's requirements in this application for the lighting and the signage limitations. There's requirements now in there for a buffer to be in place. There's requirements saying what the building would have to look like. It's not allowing us just to put any metal building there and just be good with it. In the I-1 light industrial request, all we're allowing for is just this now, overnight truck parking. We're not allowing for these frozen food lockers, the agriculture feed and mixing, and the concrete mixing locations. That's some of the reasons that I have said that I recommend this, because we have to go off of the factors. And the factors, to me, have to come before you play into the emotions of it. And being an elected official, we have to make the tough decisions. And we have to look at the factors.
Yeah, we're going to just represent us.
All right.
That's all I have.
Okay. Ben?
There are a lot of thoughts there. Again, in my time on council, 3 years now, I've said several times before, I rarely get an email, phone call, anything. And in the last 3 months, probably 50 emails thereabout. And I do want to say, first off, to each one of you that sent emails, thank you for taking the time to obviously care about your neighborhood, our city, making sure that your voice is heard. I appreciate that very, very much. I have, again, going back through, I'm a firm believer in personal property rights, and that goes to both directions. We have a gentleman here, or a company, LLC here, I believe, that owns a portion of land, 76 acres there. And within their ownership of land, I think, based upon what we have presented, they have the right to do appropriately what's within that. At the same time, I also understand that as a homeowner, one of your most sacred rights is that place you call home at night, and a place to feel safe and secure within that. Those ought to be taken into consideration. My concern with, there's a lot of talk, and until anything gets actually put in, that's all we're doing is talking. We can talk about how nice we want to make it, how great it was going to be, what type of security we might have, what type of fencing. And again, some of this is taken in the in the protective overlay. But there's also a lot of just talk that until it's actually put into place, we don't know what that looks like. My concern or fear with that is that once it's approved, anything not listed in the protective overlay is subject to following through on maybe what was stated in a public meeting, but no teeth to it. Or attempting it, and if it doesn't work out, then we're up a creek, I guess, to some degree. And so my concern is this, is that in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, what does it look like if this development goes south? And though Lou has given us great assurances on how he would like to run this, if he was to sell in 2 years, there's no guarantees on some of these issues that have been brought up that those would continue. And maybe that's something we look at in a protective overlay adjustment. I don't know. I'm just saying that those are some of the concerns. The fencing, we have the one-sided fencing there just between 135 and the property line. And maybe I misunderstood this. So if I did, please correct me, but was that this fencing would be more of a surrounding for the whole truck stop area or the truck parking. And maybe I did misunderstand that, but that's the way I took it a little bit ago. One fence will provide obviously a little bit of a detraction between the highway and the truck stop, but it's not going to do anything as far as protecting the truck stop visibility to the residential. I understand we have the berm, but
sorry for the interjection, but just to provide clarification, the applicant spoke tonight about fencing surrounding the truck parking. The Planning Commission recommended fencing a buffer to separate the west side of the truck traffic. Nothing along I-35 highway, nothing to the north of the truck parking, only along the west line. So you could think in the middle of the pavement where you would have the convenience store aspect of it, the travel center main building to the west, there would be a separation, and the truck parking would be between the off-ramp and this screening fence. So just to provide clarification.
okay, thank you. I came in here, had both sheets presented both from our staff, from Adam Jones, concerning the 17 findings of fact, and what the opinions were concerning those there. And again, open-minded throughout this evening to see what the issues are, what the concerns are. I will say this, having received those, and like I said, I did read through all of them. You know, this is my first time really this is the longest conversation I've had with Lou in my time on city council. We've never had a conversation outside of this building. Until one spoke, I didn't know where he lived. And so when conversations are had or when emails are suggesting that council as a whole or council as individuals are taking part in under the counter or under the table ideas or plans, it seems more, and I want to be careful on this, but it's almost offensive because I've never met Lou really until tonight. And so when I receive communication saying, well, I'm in this back pocket, never met the guy. And that does not incite a lot of goodwill. I say that, though, to say this. My decision tonight cannot be based upon my feelings or emotions of how I receive an email or don't, or how I feel Lou communicated. My responsibility, according to the state statutes, I have to judge upon these 17 findings of fact. And for that case there, I'm still listening as others communicate. But I will say that one of my big frustrations on the receiving end is that there's a broad brush that's been painted against many in city and several on the council. And I would encourage you, just in communication-wise, get to know us on that. I'll be glad to have conversations in this, and I know we're limited in what we can do in this regard, but you know, that's probably been one of the most disconcerting portions of the communication there, is that part. So that's what I have at this point.
All right. George?
Well, I'm going to have to echo part of what Ben's saying. You know, I do not personally know Mr. Robelli. I've never met him. He's never bought me so much as a cup of coffee. But I got the emails insinuating I was in his hip pocket. I don't know the man. And for the fact, if anybody believes that, I'm not in anybody's hip pocket, period. I'm a grandfather and a great-grandfather, and I was insinuated that I didn't care about kids. You know, I felt like I was being attacked by people who didn't even know me before I'd even seen any of this. I found out about this when I read it in the paper. I never saw any of this stuff. I heard our employees called liars when I know for a fact that they didn't know anything about it. And that didn't really build goodwill with me. I felt wrong. You know, I disagree with some of the things Mr. Robelli's done. I don't believe cameras is going to stop his trafficking down there. I'm a retired police officer. I worked Vice down at this truck stop several times, and I know how they operate. And I'll guarantee you, a set of cameras ain't going to stop them. Somebody sitting watching a set of cameras not going to stop them. I can tell you exactly how they work. I'm not going to advertise it to the world, but I'd be happy to tell you how they work. And I'll guarantee you, you're wasting your money on cameras if that's the only thing you're going to do. But I would like to see something more definite about security put in that overlay, because, you know, somebody sitting watching cameras, they're going to stop these guys. I know how they operate. But as far as me being in Mr. Robelli's hip pocket, like I say, I don't know the man. I know who he is, but I've never had a conversation with him. He's never bought me a cup of coffee, period. And people shouldn't judge people unless they know the facts. That's all I got to say about it.
Thanks, George. Jim?
All right, I'm usually the quiet analytical one, or at least I think I am. I've been listening to all of this tonight and over the last few weeks. I've read all of your emails. I've done my own independent research. I've talked to attorneys. I've talked to zoning people. I've talked to appraisers to try to figure out if it does have an effect on the value of your home. I feel like I've made myself pretty educated on this process, because this one's gotten a lot deeper than they usually do. And, you know, I think my wife, if she was here, would attest to how many hours of sleep I've lost over this, because there's two sides to this. I'm listening intently, and that's a little bit why I'm going, kind of letting everybody else talk first, because I'm really interested in what everybody has to say and all the facts that have been, and opinions that have been presented tonight. But I guess at the end of the day, so honestly, I hadn't, like Ben said, I hadn't made up my mind until the process tonight. And some of you may be frustrated by that because I didn't answer a lot of emails. Number one, there was a lot of them. And number two, you know, I'm asked to sit in judgment tonight, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on a case like this, or any case, until it's time to make a decision. So having all that said, you know, I guess I want you to know I studied this pretty hard, and I'm just going to conclude with that I intend to support my ward's opinions tonight.
John?
I guess I just want to make part of the record of, it's kind of long here, but I just typed some facts out of part of the findings of fact that I was questioned or had some disagreement with. I'm not really asking for an answer from anybody. I just want to make my points. That in the findings of fact, number 9 says, is suitable vacant land or buildings available or not available for development that currently has the same zoning requested. And Mr. Robelli said he owns land at 101st Street. I guess in saying that, Sean, we've talked about, I can't remember, somebody was up tonight talking about running water and sewer up to this area and the cost of that. I'm just curious of this. If we just ran water up there, what would it cost to run the infrastructure of water lines there? if he were to go with a lagoon system?
I believe at the, again, somebody had used the amount $3 million. It was right around $1.5 million. For the sewer, it was $1.3 million with the anticipation of somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000. Again, don't quote me on exact numbers, but round numbers for a lift station that would be required. So that's where we came up with approximately the $3 million for both water and sewer.
And the water?
Water would be approximately half price, $1.5 million.
Okay. And on the findings of fact number 12, to what extent would removal of the restrictions, i.e. the approval of the zoning request, detrimentally affect the other property in the neighborhood? I need to stop. Okay. The protective overlays don't fully protect the surrounding residential neighborhood that already exists. I agree the berm will block the view, but I think even tonight when they talked, they said that it's, I mean, the main concerns of the neighbors is prostitution, crime, the noise, pollution, stuff like that. The berm's not gonna fully protect that. So I disagree with the finding on number 12. Overnight truck parking adds many concerns that detrimentally affect the environment. There'll be lighting, noise, air quality, criminal activity, which I know we can't say it devalues the property, but I do think that it's pretty easy and pretty common sense to say that it would be a less desirable place to live, especially like the property that was notified from this. I think that would be a less desirable place to live. I think the undeveloped areas of Bear Hill, the northwest quadrant of Bear Hill, and the northwest quadrant of Saddlebrook are still undeveloped, and we still have infrastructure in there that I think that would be less desirable for us to market and get sold. Understanding that it has been purchased by a developer, but unless it gets developed and houses put on it, doesn't do us any good. Number 14, is the request in conformance with the comprehensive plan, and does it further enhance the implementation of the plan? Well, actually, the comprehensive plan, it's pretty big, but it actually conflicts with the 2018 to 2028 comprehensive plan that Russ and I were talking about earlier. And if you go to page 7.4 in the second paragraph, where it defines what industrial actually is, it says, as expected, most of these types of businesses can create environmental problems. The physical separation that was mentioned earlier tonight by the attorney of such an industrial use are to be away from the main residential part of the city is a mutual benefit to both types of land use. So fortunately for only a small portion of residential development on Broadway it says fortunately only a small portion of the residential development on Broadway is intermixed with industrial activity. So this thing is actually telling us that it's not good for us to mix this stuff together. There needs to be separation between the industrial and the residential. So I feel like by making them neighbors or allowing them to be neighbors in this, we're setting us up and them up for failure because it's not going to mix. And that's what the comprehensive plan says that we passed 2 years ago. Mr. Richardson even said in the hearing on October 19th, distance is a key in reducing sound travel. There's not enough distance here. The restrictive overlay that we placed in here does not mitigate that distance importance. On the comprehensive plan, another issue, the goals of the plan, it's on page 3.2 under land use. The very first thing, it says, the goals of the plan, guide the development of land use into desirable and efficient patterns consistent with long-range community goals and development influences. It's pretty clear it conflicts with that. The third item under that says protect the character and quality of the residential neighborhoods from intrusion of incompatible land uses, unnecessary through traffic, and negative environmental features. It's pretty clear. Still under the goals, but now I go into the plan implementation. Number 2, maintaining zoning regulations to guide growth according to the future land use plan implement. We're changing the zoning with something that's just not consistent. Number 15, This is back to the findings of fact. Number 15, what are the support or opposition to this request? I think that's pretty clear. I mean, I've been on the council 15 years, Tom's been on a little longer than that. We haven't filled this place up with this many people. Number 17, by comparison, does the relative gain to the public health, safety, and general welfare of not approving the request outweigh the loss in value or hardship on the imposed applicant? This request differs significantly from the current zoning, but that's why overnight parking requires industrial classification. I mean, it's called, and I mean, I understand he says some areas don't, but we call it industrial for overnight parking for a reason, because it's not commercial. It's different. It's not the same. It doesn't belong in a residential area. So in part of that, number 17, the property is not devalued if it remained commercial, as noted in number 9. There is other suitable land available away from the development of the residential area. In fact, he owns one. And I do agree. I mean, normally, if absent the housing in this area, this is a perfect location for a truck stop. But the housing area was there first. And I know in one of the other hearings, they talked about bringing a nuisance to it. And it's like this, the person that owned this property before Lou owned it, the person that owned it before it was developed as a neighborhood, obviously made a request and had this changed into a residential area. And I mean, yes, that changed what the potential of what the rest of this that surrounds it is, but they made that decision to do it. And I'm sure it affected the price, because most commercial property is worth more than residential property. In this instance, if you note, just an important factor I feel like, if you note in number 1 and number 2 of the 17 findings of fact, number 1, the first thing asks, existing uses, character, conditions, subject of the property in the neighborhood. Number 2, what is the current zoning of the subject property and that of the surrounding neighborhood in relation to the requested change? The answer for both. Asking about the existing use, changing this property to industrial only sets the table for property around it. So if this one right here goes, if this corner property goes to industrial, the property to the north and the property to the west will likely, when they come in, question number 1, it's asking existing uses, character, condition of the subject property, surrounding neighborhood. Well, now, this corner property is industrial. So guess what the one to the west is going to do? And the one to the north? It's going to do the same thing. So I know we say it doesn't set precedence, but it's in the 17 findings of fact, so what's everything else around it? Well, now we've made this one industrial, so we're setting the table for the next ones. So these people don't want industrial next to their neighborhood. Well, guess what's next? Yeah, I understand this is just a corner and one person got notified, but it's going to go west because now it fits into the 17 findings, at least in number 1 and number 2. That's all, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, got a motion and a second. Marlo, would you call the roll?
John Lanier,
Nay.
George Glover,
Nay.
Ben Saucetta,
Nay.
Melvin Kerr,
Yay.
Tom Jones,
Yay.
George Capps.
Yay.
What do you say? Yay or nay?
Yay.
Brandy Bailey,
Yay.
Jim Schrader.
Nay. So you guys punt it back to me.
What did Tom vote? Tom, what was your vote?
Yeah, I voted.
Yeah.
Okay, just make sure.
This is a pretty important decision, but I also want to address the citizens because like Ben and like George said, we got some pretty negative emails. I got a couple of phone calls that were respectful. They called and said, thanks for your service. We appreciate what you do. We're not in support of this, and I hope you say no. Got a couple of emails that said the same thing. I also got emails that said that we're all on the take. There were all a bunch of fat cats getting rich up here. And I can tell you right now, every one of the council members has worked very hard. They miss nights at home with their families, not 3 nights a week coming to meetings, but for years coming to meetings, dedicating their time to the city. Nobody up here is getting rich off of that. And it's pretty disrespectful, some of the comments that we got. I'm disappointed, and it's irritated me from a public service standpoint of what you try to do when you sit up here. You know, some people have been up here 10 years. Some people have been up here 15 years, and it's disgusting, some of the emails that we got and the way we got treated. But I also listen to what goes on in the community. I'm gonna vote no on this so that it doesn't pass. But we do need a 2/3 majority vote to send this back, so I'll defer back. I can vote no, not to approve it. But for a next step, if we want to send it back, does it die here?
To send it back is just a majority vote.
Okay, but if we send it back, we need to give a recommendation to the planning commission on what they look for. So John's outlined several of the findings of fact.
I gotta tell you though, I just don't believe there's anything that the planning commission can mitigate to get me to go with this. I don't believe this location is suitable for this truck stop. I believe this truck stop belongs further north out of town. Even Mr. Rubelli said tonight, and I get, Mr. Rubelli's done great things for Park City. A lot of people don't realize they even live in this town, the things he's done that's made this town better. But I also know Park City's been great to Mr. Rubelli. He would tell you that too. But I don't feel that this is suitable. It's in our comprehensive development plan that doesn't belong there. I mean, it is clear, it goes to 2028. We can update it any time. It's never been updated.
I get that.
Okay.
But what your argument is sending it back to the planning commission to look at those things that you're identifying, and then they cannot approve it, and they can vote against it based off of the argument that you're putting out. So that's what I'm saying is.
But, I'm sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead, Doug.
You did start to say there is the third alternative, which there's no reason after this vote, if it turns out that this vote is inconclusive, that there can't be a motion to overturn the planning commission, which stops this. It's gone. It's done tonight. And that requires 6 votes.
And that's what I was saying, that we need a 2/3 majority vote to end it.
To end it, that's correct. If I misunderstood, I apologize.
No, you're fine. It's just making sure everybody's clear in that.
I guess I would just ask council if you would word that motion, I would make it. Just to make sure that it's proper and correct of what you're wanting.
Is there a vote yet? I don't know if there's a vote on the motion that's on the floor.
I voted against it.
I'm sorry, I didn't pay attention then. So that failed.
Yeah, so the motion for approval failed.
A motion to overturn the recommendation of the planning commission and deny the application for the rezoning is the motion that then needs 6 votes to end this tonight.
So moved.
Yes. Okay, is there a second?
I'd second that.
Okay, George?
Well, I was just going to say, I think we need to let this be a learning experience. You know, I understand how these people in Saddlebrook feel. I understand how they feel, but going forward, you know, man, I've traveled all over the United States. And what do you find at major interstate intersections? You find business. You know, why on earth we ever put a residential development next to the interstate up there is beyond me. I wasn't part of it, but it happened, and there's nothing we can do about it now. It's a nice community. It's a nice, beautiful community, and my heart's with them. But, I'm sincere. I didn't appreciate some of the insinuations that were made against us. They were unjust. I have led a straight life, and, I'm not on anybody's take, and I'm sure not in this for the money. You know what this pays. It's sure not the money.
I'm not retiring next week, that's for sure.
Mayor, the motion's been seconded.
Yes.
I really should have said to Councilman Lanier that your motion is based upon the comments that are previously made by you in the record, and that's the basis for your motion to overturn the Planning Commission's recommendation.
That's what I meant to say, thank you.
Jim, you're seconding.
I would still second that.
Ben, did you have a comment?
I do want to comment, because I know that I kind of kicked it off on that portion concerning the comments to us. And I do want to reiterate the fact that I do appreciate the time that each person took in that. And I know that the emotions run very, very high whenever it's something that affects your livelihood, your home, your person. I understand that. But I would also, just as George mentioned, the learning experience too, as well, as I think this is a great opportunity to, whether it was the insinuation that, well, if we pass this, we're going to go to court. Okay, I mean, that can't be my basis for making a decision, is whether there's a underlying threat to not go along. And that's not the intent, I understand that. But again, I think very well it reiterated here is that none of us here do this for the money, because it's just not that case. We support you as citizens of Park City, the concerns that are valid and are real, and we look at it based upon the facts that, as John enumerated there on these ones very clearly, why we would be in opposition to it. And it has, again, I just want to reiterate, it has nothing to do with being in someone's pocket or not in someone's pocket, or feeling that if we don't respond a certain way, then there's going to be further actions. That's not on my radar. My radar is these things right here that we have to go through and have to answer accordingly. So thank you for the emails, but and I understand that it's a passionate issue.
Well, I'd like to say one more thing, Mayor. I hated that, but if you let statements like that go unchallenged, they become fact, and they're not fact. So I hated to bring it up, but, when somebody accuses you of being dishonest, you got to defend yourself, and I did. I didn't want it to become fact, so that's where I stand.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Marlo, would you call the roll?
Mr. Mayor, what is the motion exactly?
It was denial. John, would you please lay out the findings of fact?
Russ had something to say.
Well, I think he can make reference to his prior statement.
Right.
Without restating them all.
And I was confused here, whether or not you wanted to use for for final action to approve, you could have used my findings of fact stated in the staff report. Since it flipped and now it's a recommendation, or it's a motion to deny the application, I couldn't recall whether or not earlier in your last set of comments, whether you simply wanted to reference Mr. Branham's 17 findings of fact, which refute the staff's findings of fact. Does that make sense, Doug?
Yes.
And maybe Cody, if there's clarification from them, I don't know what's appropriate.
You could just allow me to comment. I think what Russ is asking for is that the basis of the vote to deny it and stop it here, we just want clarification on what is the basis of that. Is it John's oral comments here, or is his motion based on, would he present the motion based on the 17 findings of fact that were presented in my letter dated October 2nd, and then supplemented in my letter dated November 11th, which analyzes all 17 factors rather than just the handful that he just mentioned orally here. And so I think that's the clarification that is needed here, because if this vote, whatever the vote is, it opens the door for an appeal, and the district court is going to be looking at what are the basis by which the city council approved or denied this. So you need to be clear in the record for both parties' sakes to understand what are all the basis that you're denying this. So if John intended for the basis of the vote to deny it and stop it here is in accordance with the full 17 factors as I have analyzed it, I think that needs to be clarified in the record. If that's not his intention, so be it.
And John, what I would say is your vote no was very specific to the items you outlined, and we need to hold true to that because that's what your comments were, and what you voted against was off of what you clarified in the findings.
I mean, I feel like I need to review his before I would want to include his into mine. And I
That's
don't know
why I
it
think
verbatim, so I'm more comfortable with what I recited as I was speaking earlier.
So would you please just cover the findings that caused your vote no?
Okay, so number 9. Yeah, I really did this, and it's on the record, isn't it? We need to go through each one of them again?
Yes, because we've had council ask for clarification.
Okay, number 9. Is suitable vacant land or buildings available for, or not available for development that currently has the same zoning request? That's Mr. Rebelli owns land at 101st Street. There is other land available as well. To what extent, number 12, to what extent would removal of the restrictions, i.e. the approval of the zoning request, detrimentally affect the property owner in the neighborhood? The protected overlays don't fully protect the surrounding residential neighborhood that already exists. The berm will block the view only. And also, when he talked tonight, the concerns that the residents have, the restrictive overlays don't protect them from that, as he mentioned as well. Overnight truck parking adds many concerns that detrimentally affect the environment, including lighting, noise, air quality, criminal activity, likely creating a less desirable residential area, especially the one notified property. This would also likely affect the yet-to-be-developed northwest quadrant of Bear Hill and Saddlebrook. An example would be Jake Breaks that Councilman Schroeder mentioned earlier. Also, I guess I did say this earlier, but there'll be 100 trucks of hazardous materials, potentially 100 trucks of potentially hazardous materials in the event of a fire, and now they're 500 feet away from a house. A tornado hits while they're there, parked within 500 feet of a residence. Number 14, is the request in conformance with the comprehensive plan, and does it further enhance the implementation of the plan? Answer to me, no. It conflicts with our 2018 to 28 plan. On page 7.4 or 7-4, the second paragraph, it defines what industrial is. As expected, most of these types of businesses can create environmental problems. The physical separation of such industrial from the main residential part of the city is a mutual benefit to both types of land. As I said, I think we're setting them both up for failure by allowing it. And then the plan goes on further and says, fortunately, luckily, only a small portion of the residential development on Broadway is intermixed with the industrial activity. This is telling us it's not a good thing to put these things this close together without some sort of a separation. Proving this would be setting the residents and applicants up for an incompatible neighborly situation. As Mr. Richardson said on the hearing on October 19th, distance is a key in reducing sound travel. We cannot add distance in a restrictive overlay. It's there, or it's not there. In the comprehensive plan, the goals on the plan, page 3-2, under land use, sorry. The first thing mentioned, it says the goals of the comprehensive plan. Guide the development of land use into desirable and efficient patterns consistent with long-range community goals and development influences. That was number 1. And I go down to the third one. The third goal says protect the character and quality of residential neighborhoods from intrusion of incompatible land uses, unnecessary traffic, and negative environmental features. Pretty clear. Still under the goals, but now we'll go into plan implementation. On page 3-2, number 2 in this one, says under plan implementation, maintaining zoning regulations to guide the growth according to future land use plan development. Okay, now we go back to the 17 findings of fact. We're on number 15 now. What is the support or opposition to this request? I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I understand I can't name everybody's name that's been here or everybody that spoke out against it, but it's pretty clear. And I believe even the petition that they submitted, I'm fine with adding that as part of the record. Number 17, by comparison, does the relative gain to the public health, safety, and general welfare of not approving the request outweigh the loss in value or hardship imposed on the applicant? This request differs significantly from the current zoning, which is commercial, that requires the industrial classification. The property is not devalued and would still remain commercial as noted in number 9. There's other suitable land available and other development that's away from developed residential areas. I'm sorry. Then I also went further to mention, as we talked about the 17 findings of fact, it mentions in this instance, if you note in number 1 and number 2 of the 17 findings of fact, number 1 asks about existing uses, character, condition of the subject property and the surrounding neighborhood. Number 2 says, what is the current zoning of the subject property and that of surrounding neighborhood in relationship to the requested change? So the first 2 things in the 17 findings of facts is actually what's everything around it? Well, there's nothing around it that's industrial. I mean, we're not even saying across the highway is industrial or just south of it's industrial. It's clear down in front of Hartman Arena, I believe is what it was on the map. So it's nothing even close to in here. Now, I understand this is on an interstate highway. This is also next to Broadway, which is an arterial route. However, a council before us and the landowner before us, before Lou owned it, decided to put residential in there. So I think it's pretty clear that this does not meet, I don't agree with the 17 findings of fact, the ones I've listed, and it does not fall in line with our comprehensive plan.
All right, Jim?
I
Second
agree.
based off of that?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Tom, does that get you clarification?
Yeah.
Okay. We got a,
Real quick, one thing I don't want to overlook. I want to say thank you to staff who's put countless hours into this project. You've been asked to do a job by what is required of you, and you have done it phenomenally well. Our staff also are people that don't live for paychecks to make rich or to get rich off of those. And I know that I have full faith in our staff to act with integrity and character in all issues. And to them, I want to say thank you for the work there in this. And I know that you all took a lot of the brunt as well. But I appreciate how you all have handled it very much, and I want to say thank you.
all right, we got a motion and a second on the floor. Marla, would you call the roll?
John Lanier.
Aye.
George Glover.
Aye.
Ben Saucetta.
Aye.
Melvin Kerr.
Nay.
Tom Jones.
Nay.
George Capps.
Nay.
Brandy Bailey.
Aye.
Jim Schrader.
Aye.
That gives us a 5-3, so that's still not enough. Can I vote on that?
Yes, absolutely.
Aye. Lou?
Yes, sir.
By the final decision of the council on this matter, you have 30 days after tonight's action, which you can appeal to the district court.
I will do that.
All right. I want to thank everybody for participating in this matter. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting as we continue to move on. I now call item 8, Discuss and consider the approval of the Park City Substation Addition and preliminary plat for property located 1/2 miles south of 61st Street North and 1/2 mile west of Hillside Avenue. Russ?
My apologies, Mayor. Russ Avey, Planning, interim zoning administrator. In this situation, I am the interim subdivision administrator. This is a fairly, probably one of the more simplistic plats we have. Approximately 10 years ago, at the time, Westar received approval on approximately a 6-acre tract of land almost in the center of the section between Hydraulic and Hillside north or south of 61st Street North for the installation of a utility substation to serve expanding growth in our Park City area. Over the course of that time, we had revised our zoning regulations to permit a utility substation outright, and the property was approved for I-1 light industrial zoning for simply that substation. To perfect the zoning and in order to actually begin construction, Evergy, as it is now known, filed a plat through their agent, Charles Brown, with PEC. Planning Commission approved this unanimously 7-0 during their October 19th, 2020 Planning Commission hearing with no alterations or conditions.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for Russ on this? Ben?
No, I'd go ahead and move to approve the Park City Substation Addition, a preliminary plat for property located 1/2 mile south of 61st Street North and 1/2 mile west of Hillside Avenue with the following conditions. 1, if necessary, a drainage plan shall be approved by the city per Article 5-101.
Okay, is there a second? George?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Not seeing any further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. That brings us to item 9, which is discuss and consider approval of the vacation of a portion of a 20-foot utility easement on Lot 3, Block 2, Bear Hill Estates Edition, located at 1501 East Fallbrook Street. Russ?
Again, fairly straightforward. I'm not sure if we want to have a disqualification prior to discussing the matter.
Yeah, I will need to excuse myself in this vote, obviously.
Certainly. The request was originally to vacate a 20-foot utility easement in the rear property line of the subject property. The subject property is a little bit unique in that there is a 50-foot pipeline easement which runs from the northwest to the southeast, bisecting this particular block, creating a second easement, 25 feet on either side of that common property line. And then on the flanks of that pipeline easement are 20-foot utility easements for the location of municipal services as well as private utilities. As this portion of Bear Hill Estates developed, sewer and water both were placed in the front of the property within the street right-of-way, and which limits or reduces the necessity of such a large, wide easement in the rear of the residential development. Typically, we would see sanitary sewer service and private utilities in the rear setback. Seeing as that how the property is developed and the lack of need for the full 20 feet of the utility easement, staff contacted the various utility companies. Evergy did come back and say instead of a full vacation of the entirety of the 20 feet, that they requested to reserve what would be considered the southwest 10 feet against the pipeline easement to be retained for future looping of their electrical system. So as presented to you, The request has been modified and approved, recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, again 7-0, for the vacation of the northeast half of this utility easement. And I'll stand for any questions.
Ben?
So I'd go ahead and make a motion to approve the vacation of a portion of a 20-foot utility easement with Lot 3, Block 2, Bear Hill Estates Addition located at 1501 Fallbrook Street, subject to the following conditions. 1, permit the vacation of the northeasternmost 10 feet of the utility easement and retain the southwesternmost 10 feet for continued use as a utility easement.
I'll second it.
Okay. Tom? Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain.
And that motion passes 7-0. The next item on the agenda is item 10, which is discuss and consider approval of the contract with Baughman Company, PA, for engineering and design of water main improvements of 69th Street North from Broadway. Sean?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. This one may catch a couple council members by surprise because this has been rather quick to develop, and hopefully after I explain it, you can understand why. Rural Water District 2 currently has a 3-inch water line that starts at the northwest corner of 77th and Broadway. It goes under Broadway, and then it goes under 77th, and then runs along the east side of Broadway all the way down to 69th Street. There's a graphic up there that I put up. It's basically the yellow line at the bottom. I'm sorry, so that we could capture it all. North is on the left side of the page, if that makes sense. Okay, so again, it starts at the northwest corner, 77th and Broadway, goes under Broadway, then under 77th, and then goes all the way down to 69th Street. When it gets to 69th and Broadway, it turns into a 2-inch water line. It runs along the north side of 69th Street, and eventually tees off and goes under the road so that it can services Rural Water District 2 residents, or customers, I should say, that are either on Mosley or Santa Fe. Does that make sense? Okay. The presence of this water line and the associated easement that goes along with it, obviously it has created some engineering challenges for the development that's occurring at 69th and Broadway of the adjacent parcel. And it also presents an unknown or future liability to the improvements themselves. That pipe right there, we don't know, it's probably somewhere between 40 and 60 years old. But it's right at the entrance of the new development that's going on at 69th and Broadway. So working with Rural Water District 2, the developers of the land both adjacent to Broadway as well as Lou Rebelli's property adjacent to 69th Street, and the construction company that is currently doing the work at the Amazon location, staff has developed and is proposing this plan whereas the city would install a new 8-inch water line, tapping off our existing 12-inch water line main at Broadway and 69th, and then running along the north side of 69th Street. So if I take a look at that, I don't have it presented on this graphic, but at 69th and Broadway, the city has a 12-inch water main that runs along the western edge of Broadway. It goes all the way up until you get right around 81 Speedway, then it dips under Broadway and goes up the eastern side of Broadway going north. So what we're looking at doing is tapping in off the 12-inch water main at 69th and Broadway, go under the road, and then run along the north side of 69th Street. An 8-inch line is very important because of the fact now we can put fire hydrants on there, and that affords some kind of protection, fire protection for the residents along Mosley and Santa Fe, which are not in our city limits, but it provides them protection that they've never had before. Okay. Once completed, Rural Water District 2 has agreed that they would abandon their lines in the associated easement, and Park City would assume the responsibility of providing water service to all former Rural Water District customers south of 77th Street. So, to me, the reason why this is good, and I'm going off script a little bit, it's a win-win-win in my mind for everybody involved. For Amazon, it takes away a future liability that they have because right now they've got 4 different driveways that they are engineering or proposing going into their site. 2 of the drives we know at a minimum are going to be for heavy truck traffic. So having that 3-inch line that's 40 to 60 years old sitting down below that, it creates a liability for them in the future. By getting rid of the easement, it's It's good for Rural Water District 2 because they incur the cost of providing water service to those residents. If they don't have to provide water service to those residents, then they don't incur that cost. So in some respects, it could be seen as a net neutral cash position for Rural Water District 2, but that's not entirely correct because of our 20-year loss settlement. We have to pay them $250 to install a new meter, plus we have to pay them 17% for residential units, anything within the district. We'd have to pay that one way or another. It's good for Lou Rebelli because right now, all of his development that's up adjacent to the highway is tapped in off a line at 77th Street. So it runs all the way down, and it's a dead-end loop, or it's a dead end, not a loop. So there's not the best water quality, but that's okay. It's primarily warehouses. If we take it all the way over to Aircap Drive, we can loop the system. So now he has better fire protection for all of his businesses, better quality. And then finally, the actual customers, the current existing customers for Rural Water District 2. What they pay to Rural Water District 2 right now, we won't get into. All I can say is, even though they would not be in the city, we charge 1.5% our regular water rates. And if you factor in paying that 1.5% plus the 17% surcharge, those Rural Water District 2 customers will still probably pay half of what they have been paying. So again, win-win-win all the way around. But we're trying to make some things go in a hurry. So attached is a proposed scope of service and fees for Baughman Company to design the new water line. Why Baughman? Because of the fact they're already working with Amazon. They're already halfway through this and know the topography rather well. Staff has obtained initial concurrence from both developers, and we're working on a three-way, now a four-way agreement, whereas the two developers in the city would each pay or be reimbursed 1/3 of the total cost of the improvements, including engineering design. The reason why it's a four-way agreement is we've now included Rural Water District 2 to make certain that they have concurred and said, yes, we will abandon the easement. So far, they've met on this, and they're supportive of this concept. So staff is anticipating presenting that agreement, the four-way agreement, on the November 24th council meeting, but also at the same time, it's going to come real quick. I'll present you a project authorization resolution and an actual construction contract for the construction of it, more than likely with the company that is already out there right now doing the construction for Amazon. They're already there. They can start laying the pipe as well. The anticipated completion of the new water line would be towards the end of January at the latest of 2021. It is unbudgeted CIP, I get that. Right now, the current estimate of the whole project is somewhere between $184,000 and $189,000. And again, we've gotten concurrence initially. We're working on the agreement both with Amazon as well as Lou Rebelli that, hey, we're in for a third, our fair share. So staff recommends approval and authorizing the mayor to finalize and execute a contract with Baughman in an amount not to exceed $23,900. And of course, I can answer any questions that council may have.
This is really a good thing for all parties involved, especially the people that are serviced by that. And when you look at the infrastructure coming in, having a newer line underneath there, larger, it's going to service us better in the future, and especially when we can split that cost 3 ways.
Sorry.
Jim?
I really have no questions on this. I think you explained it well, and I track. So I would move to authorize the mayor to finalize and execute a contract with Baughman Company, PA, in the amount not to exceed $23,900 for engineering and design of a water main improvements north of 69th Street North from Broadway to 135 to be paid from the Capital Projects Fund.
Second.
Second by John.
Yep.
Any further discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. Thanks, everybody. Tonight was hard. I know you all did your diligence and a lot of hard work on both sides. That goes for staff and council. I appreciate the hard work. I know I fielded a lot of phone calls from you. I know a lot of you lost a lot of sleep kicking this back and forth. Thank you. Jim?
I can't add anything that hasn't already been said tonight, so no comments.
Randy?
I just want to say thanks, John. I appreciate your input on the factors of finding, because your understanding of it was very different from my understanding of it. So it just made me rethink some things. So thank you. I appreciate the discussion.
Okay. George?
Well, I guess the best way I could sum my feelings up is I'm confused, or maybe I'm just getting old, but I'll let it go at that.
Tom?
Don't have anything.
Melvin?
I'm good.
Ben?
Happy Veterans Day tomorrow to all of those who have served our country.
George?
Yeah, I thought we had good discussion tonight. I'd like to see more interaction with our residents, with our council. I think there's been a lack of that, so I was appreciative to all the residents that came tonight, and other folks as well that gave their input. As with COVID and the spikes going up, always check on your neighbors and your friends, just elderly people that you know, to kind of check on them, make sure they're okay. And also the veterans, I wanted to thank you for just serving our country and what you do. Thank you.
And John?
Also, I gotta say, hand it to the planning commission, because they spent some serious time on this thing too. So I say thanks to them, and I know, we overturned all of what they did, but that's part of the process and part of why it's set up the way it is with the checks and balances that we have. So, again, thank you to them, and, that's all I have. I would make a motion to adjourn.
And Ben?
Second.
Okay. We got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And that motion passes 8-0. Thank you.